All right, Nick, thank you for coming here and doing the podcast, man. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Great to be with you, Danny.
And it gives you an extra little bit of credibility, the fact that you were recommended by Chris and Zach, who came on here to talk about the Danny Casolaro case and the octopus conspiracies.
A very good docuseries.
Yes, it was fascinating. And you are very much wrapped up in reporting on some of the same stuff that they were.
A lot of people have actually compared me to Danny Casolaro.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No way.
And it was interesting because he was murdered in West Virginia. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal about a big interstate child network that was run by a couple of guys, Lawrence King and then Craig Spence, who was a CIA asset and lived in Washington, D.C., and his home was wired for audiovisual blackmail. Now, the first time I was in Nebraska investigating that story, I did have a death threat. So then my next time out, there was a guy in West Virginia that I had to get to talk to me. So, and he really wasn't inclined to talk to me. So I drove down to West Virginia. I live in New York City. Mm-hmm. And I said, Henry, I'm just in the neighborhood and, I thought we could talk. And we talked a little bit. But so here I was in West Virginia and I'm fully cognizant this is where Danny Casolaro has gotten murdered. And my last time out on this story, I'd gotten a death threat. So that was a little funky for me. And because this guy had a lot of secrets. And
this particular guy you were going to meet.
Yeah, I needed him for the book. I really needed him for the book because he ran a gay escort service in Washington, D.C. And actually, he and I eventually wrote a book together. But CIA assets would use his gay escorts to compromise closeted politicians.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, this is a dark world. It's a really dark world.
It's a very dark world. I mean, I'm a light guy, but I'm in a dark world. So I think if I was a dark guy in this dark world, I probably would have offed myself by now. Not that I'm planning on offing myself in the near future.
Yeah, don't say that, man. Don't say that. You're not suicidal, if anyone's curious.
I am not suicidal, no.
You were also the original guy who uncovered Epstein's little black book and made it public.
I was the guy that published Epstein's black book, yes. I had the Franklin Scandal got published in 2009, 2010, and I'd spent 7 years on it. And it was dark. I mean, I went as deep into a pedophile network as someone can go. I interviewed like one of the blackmail photographers. And then Henry, who was interacting with various CIA assets. Like that network, like the Epstein network, it's intelligence. I mean, it's used to compromise people. So I went very, very deep into that network. And what I found was unbelievably horrific. So that book took a lot out of me, and we just couldn't get people to buy it. People thought, nah, the government would never be part of a pedophile network. This is before Epstein. Mm-hmm. And Epstein at this point was a lone pedophile. There wasn't a network. He wasn't pandering. That's what the newspaper said he was basically a lone pedophile. And I went down there in 2012. I started looking into it in 2011. Then I went down there in 2012, started knocking on doors and doing my thing. And I ended up with this black book. And then I brought it back to New York City because I'd been pitching Epstein and magazines really didn't want to deal with it at all. And I figured, well, once I get the black book, they're going to want to do something with it. And so I was pitching the black book and no one wanted to touch it. Finally, Gawker published it in 2015. And then the floodgates opened on the black book. I mean, tons of ink have been dumped on the black book. And I think only 2 publications have given me credit for it. It's kind of funny.
So you were knocking on doors and you got a hold of it. You glossed over that pretty fast. Whose doors were you knocking on and where specifically did you get the book?
I mean, there are sources that I can't give out, but I was talking to anybody that I thought was affiliated with Epstein. And
you're talking about like big shots, like high level Wall Street people? Or are you talking about?
I'm talking more about attorneys that were affiliated with it. And then when I got the black book, the black book has like about 150 victims.
And can you say where you got the black book?
It really wouldn't. No, I can't.
Okay,
It's
fair enough.
as much as I'd like to. The thing about
I gotta ask.
Well, I'm very good at getting documents that no one else has gotten. Like when I wrote the Franklin scandal, I got there was a grand jury, and all that stuff was sealed.
Okay.
And I got all the testimony and all the exhibits from the grand jury. I'm one of those guys that people kind of trust. I mean, I think I look trustworthy. I mean,
Yeah, totally.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm very trustworthy. But the reason why people give me stuff is because I don't tell them where I got it. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You got to maintain that credibility.
But anyway, so I started calling these victims. Mm-hmm. And they started talking about being flown around. And I realized this guy wasn't a lone pedophile. He was at the helm of a pedophile network. He was flying these young girls to very powerful guys. Mm-hmm. And that's the story that I came back with in New York City. That's the story that I pitched. And people were just frightened of it. And I'd had one go around with, I was pitching the Franklin scandal, mm-hmm. which is basically almost identical to Epstein. The Franklin scandal is about Republicans, little boys. And Epstein is, for the most part, Democrats, little girls. So I was pitching the Franklin scandal, and this is at a point I had a lot of connections in the mainstream media, mm-hmm. and I could pitch it to just about, I could pitch it to a lot of different editors. Mm-hmm. So I was pitching the Franklin scandal to these editors, and I would look into their eyes, and I could see the wheels turning. They were up against cognitive dissonance, and basically what was going on in their minds was, this is a really horrible story. All these kids getting abused and it covered up. We're going to need to help Nick Bryant. Or I can just write Nick Bryant off as crazy right now, and then I can have a nice dinner with my family.
Not worry about losing my job.
Yeah. So every editor, and I had a lot of connections in, I live in New York City. I've lived there for 30 years. Mm-hmm. So I had a lot of connections in the media, and I was really surprised. You know, I knew that most of them would be spineless.
Right.
But there was only one guy that helped me, that had juice in publishing. There was only one guy.
Who's that?
His name was Malachi McCourt. His brother had written Angela's Ashes, and Malachi had published 5 or 6 books. And he was very popular. He was a very popular writer, and just he was a great wit. And he tried to help me with it, and he couldn't get any traction. So.
And how did you eventually get it in front of Gawker?
Well, John Cook.
We're talking about Epstein. You're talking about Franklin scandal, right?
Yeah, but now we can jump between Franklin and because they're very similar. I hooked up with John Cook, and he was the editor-in-chief of Gawker at that point, and he was willing to do it. And he was willing to, because at that point I had passenger manifests too. I was the first guy to really have passenger manifests also, that had like Clinton's name on it, and Kevin Spacey and Alan Dershowitz. I mean, I had the passenger manifest too. So Gawker was willing to do that. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate that Gawker has since been sued into oblivion, because Gawker,
Hulk Hogan and Peter Thiel.
Yeah, they outed Peter Thiel as gay, and Peter's kind of a fascist, and he said to everybody, anybody that sues Gawker, I will pay for it.
Right.
So that's how Gawker got taken down. And it's really unfortunate because Gawker would publish guys like me that no one else would touch.
Right.
So it's really unfortunate that Gawker got taken down.
So, yeah, you got it into Gawker. Gawker published The Little Black Book. And what year was this?
2015.
This was 2015. And then what happened after that? Like, what was the reaction?
Well, everybody started doing articles about the Black Book.
From the Gawker article.
The floodgates just opened.
Right.
But what was really troubling to me, there were only 2 publications that credited me with getting the Black Book out there. It's kind of interesting. Vanity Fair wrote an article about it, and the New York Times gave me a little mention. But everybody else, no one else mentioned my name.
And recently, we were talking earlier, there was something that recently happened about 2 weeks ago with something that got, it was a grand jury, details that got unsealed. What happened there?
Well, with Epstein, the Palm Beach Police Department had the statements of 5 underage girls that were by Epstein.
Okay.
But they knew of 17 more. So we're talking 22 at this point. And they were just going to indict Epstein on 5 counts of child abuse. But that case got taken away from them, and it was given to a grand jury. And I don't know if your listeners or viewers are familiar with how grand juries work. Is a special prosecutor is chosen to be the prosecutor of a grand jury. And grand jurors are just citizens that have shown up for grand jury duty. And it's up to the special prosecutor to call the witnesses and show them exhibits. Mm-hmm. So special prosecutors can twist them any way they want. And as we were talking about earlier, there was a New York Supreme Court justice named Saul Weschler who said that special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. Mm-hmm. And that's what Barry Kirshner, he was a special prosecutor in Florida, did. They called 2 girls and skewered them. And it's the grand jury documentation that was unsealed. It's kind of mind-boggling. One of the girls was 14 years old when she was by Jeffrey Epstein, and at the time she testified, she was 16. And they're calling her a prostitute. And one of the grand jurors is saying to her, what you were doing, you knew that it was bad, right? You knew it was bad. I mean, she's 14 years old when she's getting by Jeffrey Epstein, and right. This is how they're treating her. And that grand jury ultimately concluded that Jeffrey Epstein hadn't a single child. So
and none of this was public until 2 weeks ago.
None of this was public. I mean, everybody knew that the grand jury was cooked because the Palm Beach Police Department had the statements of 5 victims and knew of 17 others. So for that grand jury not to return any indictments against Jeffrey Epstein really shows how corrupt it was.
Mm. Yeah, no, it really. And what was Alex Acosta? He was the guy in Florida when Jeffrey was first indicted.
Yeah. Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney. And what happened with the grand jury was so corrupt that Michael Ryder, who is the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department, became quite vociferous. He said this is like the worst judicial error in modern history. And he demanded that the feds, the Department of Justice, investigate Epstein. And Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney in Southern Florida for that point, so it was under his purview. And Alexander Acosta, at this point, the feds had a list of over 30 victims, underage victims, over 30 underage victims. And Alexander Acosta was told that Epstein was intelligence and it was above his pay grade and not to pursue it. So that the feds, even though they had a list of over 30 victims, did not indict Jeffrey Epstein on a single count of child abuse, which is really stunning, stunning.
So what, after all the investigations and all the stuff that you've read about Epstein in your career, what is your overall 30,000-foot view of who he was and who he worked for and what his motives were?
Well, the Epstein network is very similar to the network I wrote about in the Franklin scandal. Mm-hmm. And basically, Epstein, now it's really tough to know. I've got a picture. Epstein went to Interlochen. It's an arts camp in northern Michigan one summer. And I've got the pictures of Epstein at that. And you can check it out on my blog.
Right.
But there's a little, I believe that there's a little William Barr at Interlochen at the same time. William Barr was
Bill Barr's dad? Bill Barr. Okay, yeah.
Bill Barr's dad hired Epstein.
At Drexel. Or not Drexel, I'm sorry, the Dalton School, right?
Yes. 7 years later. And Epstein was completely unqualified. He was a college dropout.
Right.
There's no way that he should have been hired. Dalton is the preeminent preparatory school in America, or certainly one of them. And there's no way that Jeffrey Epstein should have been hired. But you can take a look at these pictures that I have, and you can compare them to Bill Barr and Bill Barr now.
Is this?
There he is. That's it.
You know, Steve, every night my cover doesn't get blown as a CIA plant, I like to party.
Beer pong with the feds, butt chugging with the boys.
I like to drink that government money, but I don't bounce back quite like I used to, especially now that I'm in my 30s. Until I found out about Z-Biotics pre-alcohol.
It's a vial you drink before your alcoholic fun time to avoid rough mornings. Look at that little thing. It's amazing. I keep one of these in my pocket. It's awesome.
Z-Biotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic.
This was invented by PhD scientists to tackle sour mornings after drinking.
Here's how it works. Okay, when you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxin byproduct in the gut.
And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day.
Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down.
Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow.
Every time I have pre-alcohol before a night out on the town, I notice a huge difference the next day where I can actually wake up and work out or do a podcast with a semi-functional brain. At first, I was skeptical about Z-Biotics until a few weeks ago, I had a meeting with my handlers at Langley over drinks. Luckily, I had Z-Biotics with me, so I decided to give it a shot, and boy, was I glad I did. And you wouldn't believe how sharp and on point I felt the next morning. I won't go to Langley again without it. Weddings, vacations, birthdays, bar mitzvahs, get the most out of your summer by stocking up on Z-Biotics pre-alcohol now. Go to zbiotics.com/Danny to get 15% off your first order by using the code DANNY at checkout. Pre-alcohol is back with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/Danny. It's spelled zbiotics.com/DANNY and use the code Danny at checkout for 15% off. And thanks again to Z-Biotics for sponsoring our podcast. It's linked below.
Right there. There's Epstein right up there.
Oh, this is the art school?
Yes, Interlaken.
Interlaken. Okay. What year was this?
This was in 1967. And
That's Epstein on the right?
that's Epstein standing up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now I believe that this is Bill Barr. What's bizarre, though, is that this is a yearbook that doesn't have any names. And Interlaken has denied that Bill Barr attended their camp. They can't deny that Jeffrey Epstein attended it because he built a lodge. He gave them $500,000 to build the Jeffrey Epstein lodge.
Zoom in on him, on Epstein standing there, Steve. Wow, I've never seen this photo. Oh, nope, you had it there for a second. And then you zoomed out. There you go. Yeah, can you zoom in
that's
more on
the
that?
extent.
Oh, that's as far as you can go.
Yeah.
There's a little Jeffrey Epstein.
Wow, man. That's
Now,
wild.
but check it out. Now, if you go to my website, you'll see that I've got a picture of little William Barr and big William Barr. It's right below these pictures.
Oh, right
There we go. Now Check it out. Are these
Look
not
at that.
Are these not the
Uncanny.
same guys?
Wow, dude. So Bill Barr, William Barr's dad, was the head of Dalton School.
Yeah.
That school was really fishy.
Well, it was run after Bill Barr, or Donald Barr, Bill Barr's dad.
Donald Barr was his name, yeah. And he was a weirdo. Like, he did a lot of weird shit, right?
Well, he was weird, but then the next headmaster started girls there, too.
Didn't Bill Barr's dad, who ran that school, didn't he write some, like, crazy sci-fi novels about, like, what did he write? Like, some crazy shit.
He wrote a sci-fi novel about intergalactic sex trafficking.
Yes, intergalactic sex trafficking.
And
there's the title of the podcast.
And he's got a very graphic description of a 15-year-old girl
Right.
That's getting.
Yes, and they forced the prisoners to whatever to like this girl. We're gonna have to censor the out of this podcast, and so we don't get shadow banned. And then so they could use that as like blackmail on these guys for some other reason to gain power. But it was like it's so in line with these crazy stories that you're reporting on.
But here's the thing with this. Okay, so
and he also got people like that were supposed to go to some other like were supposed to go to Harvard. He got them like. He wrote a letter to Harvard saying these people were like crazy homosexuals and that you shouldn't admit them to Harvard because they are going to cause trouble and cause mayhem.
Donald Barr was a very strange guy. And people have wondered, was there a connection between Donald Barr and Epstein prior to Donald Barr hiring Epstein. And I believe that this is the connection. I believe that Epstein. Now, here's what's bizarre about these yearbooks. These are yearbooks that do not have people's names. These yearbooks do not have their names. Now, how weird is that?
Yeah, why wouldn't they have the names?
It's the only yearbook I've ever come across in my entire life, and I'm getting up there in years, that doesn't have names. But if you look at those two guys, okay, so you can see that go up with the old Barr and the new Barr.
Yep, go down, down, right there.
There we go. So if you look at them, he grew into his ears. I used to have big ears.
Yep.
I kind of grew into my ears. But if you look at the nose, if you look at the dimples, I mean, that's
your guy.
Is that not William Barr?
That's William Barr, 100%. I mean, it looks just like him.
Yes.
Just like the other guy looks like, just like the other kid is clearly Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, exactly. So this is how I believe Epstein got into Dalton, is he knew the Barrs going back to 1967, and he was hired in 1974 for Dalton.
Do you think there was a plan behind bringing Jeffrey Epstein to Dalton?
It's one of those things that I just don't know.
Right.
But here's the thing. I firmly believe that Epstein was compromising these people for intelligence. Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney, and he was told to stand down because Epstein was intelligence. Now, there's only two people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the president, one is the attorney general. That message can be delivered by a minion of the president or the attorney general, but it has to emanate from one of those two positions. So Epstein was locked in to some very, very powerful people, that have a lot of juice.
Yes.
And where did that nexus occur? Did that nexus occur at Dalton? Did it occur later in Wall Street? I mean, we don't know exactly.
Well, I think there's a report of one of the girls. I think he admitted to dating girls who were attending Dalton when he was a teacher there, and all the kids that went to Dalton, their parents were the who's who of New York. Those guys were high-level Wall Street investors, Hollywood people, and they were the biggest big shots in America, basically. And I recall reading a story where one of the girls who was attending there, who was friends with Jeff when he was teaching, introduced Jeffrey to his dad, who was like a really big shot investor, and then he hired Jeffrey to work for
Bear Stearns.
That was Bear Stearns, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is the cover story. I don't know if, I've been looking at Jeffrey Epstein since 2012. So I've been studying Jeffrey Epstein for 14 years. Somehow he got hooked up with intelligence, and then he was on the yellow brick road. And I don't know where that occurred, but I think that the Barrs, those pictures that I was able to recover at Interlochen, I think that they show how it started for Epstein.
What is Bill Barr doing today? Is he still, he just endorsed Donald Trump, didn't he?
Bill Barr has been a CIA guy forever. I mean, even on his Wikipedia page, it says he was a CIA guy.
Yeah.
And he hasn't really, he's been a CIA guy forever. He was the attorney general. Okay.
What's his title right now, though?
His title right now is,
can you find that, Steve?
I'm retired and I'm just making a lot of money doing nothing. That's
American attorney.
Can you if you scroll down to the right, it'll tell you his current occupation. It should at least.
I mean, he's got so many accolades.
Go back, get out of Wikipedia.
But he's represented a bunch of big companies, corporations that, I mean, he's a...
See what you can find.
He's a millionaire many times over.
Yeah.
But the thing with Bill Barr is the book that I wrote, The Franklin Scandal, A Story of Power Brokers, Child Abuse and Betrayal, which is about a child trafficking network, almost exactly like Epstein's. Bill Barr was the attorney general under Bush 1. That covered it up.
That covered up the whole Franklin scandal.
That covered up the Franklin scandal. And then he's the attorney general under Trump, who covers up the Epstein scandal. It's amazing that he's an attorney general twice, and he covers up these two large interstate petrol networks that have connections to intelligence.
Is Bill Barr, how is he connected to Apollo Global and Drexel and those big Wall Street guys?
Well, he had worked for some large corporations, like I believe it was Verizon, but I do not know how he could have been connected to those other Wall Street firms.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be curious.
But he worked for a number of large corporations that just gave him millions of dollars, especially after he covered up the Franklin child trafficking network. I mean, and it's consistent with these guys. They cover up networks like that, and then all of a sudden they become upwardly mobile. And then Bill Barr, he said, well, we're going to get to the bottom of this Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein,
Right.
he was, we're going to get we're going to get to the bottom of what happened in this prison, and we're going to get to the bottom. We're going to indict all the perpetrators. And he was beating his chest with bravado, saying, there's a quote like, anybody that's affiliated with Jeffrey Epstein should not sleep very well. And
dude, you were the start of this whole thing, buddy.
and he didn't indict anybody. He didn't indict anybody. I mean, when Biden took over, Ghislaine Maxwell was indicted. But Barr didn't do anything to any of those perpetrators.
Yeah, what's the latest on Ghislaine? What happened to her? What's she doing right now? What's going to happen to her?
Ghislaine, I mean, here's the thing with that. Ghislaine trafficked children for 20 to 25 years. And that's a heavy sentence for trafficking. If you get busted trafficking a child, if you get indicted, you're looking at 15 years to life. And she trafficked multiple children for multiple years, and she was indicted on one count of child trafficking, where she should have been looking at the rest of her life in prison. She ended up getting 20 years, but she's already in a dormitory, which is that's about as leisurely as you're going to get in a federal prison. And inmates that have been there for years that are on the verge of getting released go to the dormitories. But Ghislaine Maxwell jumped into a dormitory after 2 or 3 years. So she's already being treated very well. And she's trying to find loopholes to get out of prison.
Yeah. I'd be shocked. I wouldn't be surprised if she found out a way to get out soon in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, what she's doing is, okay, the feds came up with a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein. And the deal was that Epstein would pay back the girls that he would give them settlements. But everybody else that had anything to do with Epstein would not get indicted, was completely exonerated. The procurers were exonerated, the perpetrators were exonerated. And then, and this was the deal that Alexander Acosta worked out. And then it was sealed because it was such a dirty deal that they didn't want anybody to know that it was sealed. And ultimately, there were attorneys that were filing civil lawsuits against Jeffrey Epstein. And the Palm Beach police or Palm Beach newspaper ultimately they were able to get that unsealed. And then what it showed was that everybody that was affiliated with Epstein was completely exonerated from children, from the procurers to the perps.
And who was the girl that you were able to track down? You said it took you 3 years to find this girl, and she had filed a suit, but then she dropped it against Trump, right?
Yeah, there was a girl named Katie Johnson who filed a lawsuit. She said that she'd been by Epstein and Trump when she was 13 years old. And it was originally shopped around. It was filed, and then it was withdrawn, and then it was filed again. And this girl ended up with Lisa Bloom as her attorney. And Lisa Bloom is a nasty piece of work. I mean, she went to work for Harvey Weinstein.
Right. No morals.
To completely dismantle these women that had come out and said that they've been by Harvey Weinstein. So Lisa Bloom put this girl in a hotel for the night and said that she was going to pick her up the next morning. And she did pick her up the next morning, but she said that we're going to have a press conference. You're going to go before a press conference. Now, you do not treat a victim of sexual abuse that way. You've got to think of their welfare before you think of political expedience. Because Lisa Bloom wanted her to say that I was by Trump and Epstein. I mean, that's what she wanted her to do. But her name is, well, her name in the lawsuit documentation is Katie Johnson. But she just kind of recanted, and she wanted nothing more to do with, there was a lot of pressure put on her, and there wasn't, what's really tragic here is
when the Mossad hacked my phone last month, I realized that was the final straw. It was time to get Mint Mobile.
Mint is great because they don't attack their customers.
And switching over is so fast, I got it done while walking out of the agency right before the black helicopters found me. They don't even know I have it yet.
That's a good business model there. No hoops, no abductions, just $15 a month for full service.
Just go to mintmobile.com/Danny. They have 3, 6, and 12-month plans. The 3-month plans are only $15, including unlimited.
Their website is so easy and fast to purchase and activate. You know it isn't run by the government.
All plans come with high-speed data and text on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone on any Mint Mobile plan. Plus, you get to keep your phone number and contacts.
All right, there's still a catch. The government still spies on you. But with Mint Mobile, it'll cost you less.
And today, our listeners can get this new 3-month Mint Mobile wireless plan for only $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Danny. That's mintmobile.com/Danny. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Danny. It's spelled mintmobile.com/DANNY. $45 upfront payment is required, which is equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on the first 3-month plan only. Speeds slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions may apply. See mintmobile.com for details. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
there wasn't any support. If she is, in fact, a victim, there really wasn't any support that was given to her. She was just being used. And she has since receded into historical anonymity. That lawsuit has been withdrawn. And I found her. She's living in the Southwest. But she got so burned by it that she doesn't want to talk to me. Or I don't think she really wants to talk to anybody about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure somebody got to her, right? Somebody paid her off, or somebody convinced her to stay silent.
Well, I think that there were definitely threats against her, and the way that she was used by Lisa Bloom was pretty egregious. So if she was, in fact, a victim, I can see her saying, the hell with it all. You know, I'm getting threats. I'm not being treated right. I'm just going to recede into historical anonymity. I could see how she would do that. So we're not really able to, I mean, she provides a lot of detail in her affidavit. And if it's true.
Detail about?
Her game by Trump and Epstein.
Okay.
Now, if the stuff in her affidavit is true, those guys are monsters. Well, we know Epstein is for sure.
Right.
But if what she's saying about Trump is true, it's really, you can get that information online and the deposition online, and it's really.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's out there. It's floating around.
Yeah, there was something I read earlier where it was a conversation that was somehow recorded between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein. And Steve Bannon said to Jeffrey Epstein, he goes, I was really scared of you during the 2016 presidential race because of what you had on Trump. And Epstein's response was, you should have been scared about what I had on you.
Well, here's what people make mistakes about Jeffrey Epstein is I believe that Jeffrey Epstein compromised some of the most powerful men in America. Actually, some of the most powerful men in the world. But he was a dropout from a blue class or a blue collar working class family in Coney Island.
We don't need to read it. I don't want to. We don't. I mean, we can maybe do that on Patreon, but that's going to be too much for this.
So Jeffrey Epstein is this college dropout from Coney Island, from a working class family in Coney Island. There is no way that Jeffrey Epstein is going to be able to blackmail the most powerful men in the world. I mean, they would just get rid of him. In an article I wrote about Epstein he got a lot of money from Les Wexner, and Les Wexner was heavily plugged into the mafia. And there's no way that Jeffrey Epstein is going to go after Les Wexner, because Les Wexner is just going to call his buddies in the mafia and say, we got to get rid of this guy. The only way that Jeffrey Epstein could blackmail people is that there was an organization behind him that said to these guys that were blackmailed, if you touch Jeffrey Epstein, there's going to be retribution. And that is the only way that someone like Jeffrey Epstein could blackmail these powerful guys. He would have to, it would have to be known that he was protected.
But what if it wasn't like overt in your face blackmail? Okay, so what if he's inviting these people to his island, having these parties? I know the Apollo Global had this thing called the Predators Ball every year in New York, where they would invite these powerful people, Trump, Leon Black, Adnan Khashoggi, these crazy arms dealers, drug dealers, all these Wall Street investors. They would all be at these giant parties, right? And then there would be all these like young girls, quote unquote, if you want to call them prostitutes or not, they were there, and these guys were, these old, you know, rich dudes were mingling with them and whatever, doing whatever they were doing with them, but they were there. So these guys kind of knew in the back of their mind that like they were compromised. Maybe they did or didn't know that some of these rooms that they were going in were mic'd up or had cameras in them, but they kind of knew in the back of their mind, like, I'm doing this, I'm engaging in all this. These other billionaires around me are also all engaging in this. I could be compromised. If I had to bet on it, I would bet I am, but I'm not gonna look that in that mirror right now. Like Jeff doesn't have to go out of his way to say, look, if you don't do this, I'm gonna release this stuff. They kind of all knew that they were compromised by Jeffrey Epstein, or whether it be him or somebody else, because they were socializing with all these big shots around all these young girls at the same time.
Well, I once wrote, if love is blind, if love is blind, lust is deaf, dumb, and quadriplegic. And and with these guys, I mean, why do you think Epstein had cameras in all of his homes?
Right.
According to Maria Farmer, and also Virginia Giuffre, in his New York City home, there was like a room, a secret room that had monitors, that every bedroom and every bathroom was monitored, and that there were men, as in plural, looking at the monitors, which is exactly the same thing with the Franklin scandal, the exact same setup.
Right.
And with blackmail, I think, and that's one thing that Americans really don't understand about their political system, is that it is predicated on blackmail. There was Tennessee Representative Tim Burchett that came out in December and said, my colleagues are being blackmailed in honey traps in motels. Now, I've been saying that for 22 years. So finally, we've got a federal congressman that's saying, my colleagues are getting blackmailed in honey traps.
Who was he? Did he specify who his colleagues? I mean,
he did not specify
like who do you think he was talking about?
Probably like 75% of them. Yeah. But check this out:
like his colleagues. Who are his colleagues? Other senators?
Well, other people in the House and senators. His colleagues have the congressional approval rating is 13%.
Okay.
So obviously, our federal representatives are not working in our best interests. Obviously. So they're working in other people's best interests. That's why the congressional approval rating is 13%. And I really believe that our political system is just rife with blackmail. We have, when you think of, like, there's a lot of really good men and smart men on the right, and there's a lot of really good men and smart men on the left. We are left with Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. How does that happen?
Right.
That only happens when a system is so rotten and perfidious that it only allows someone that is that compromised to run.
Yeah. And then when you have Joe Biden it seems like he's on the verge of dropping out of the race, when every single Democrat's begging him to drop out of the race, and they're talking about the next best person being his vice president, a former prosecutor, and they completely ignore Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is probably like one of the most popular among among the population as far as like Democratic nominees, yet they completely ignore all that.
Well, the thing about Robert Kennedy is the media,
He was also in the Black Book too, though.
well, he wasn't circled, but he was in the Black Book.
Okay.
The thing about Robert Kennedy is the media has done such a hatchet job on him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would really be surprised if you found one or two positive articles about Robert Kennedy.
But how much of an effect do you think like mainstream news articles have on the population when he's going on like Joe Rogan's podcast? He's going on all these podcasts. He's been on like the biggest podcasts in the world, all of them. I wonder how much influence the mainstream media would have compared to that.
Well, what's kind of interesting about the mainstream media, the majority of Americans don't trust the mainstream media.
Right.
They don't trust it. I think it's like 66%, or I don't. It fluctuates, but yet they listen to the mainstream media. That's what's kind of mind-boggling about it. The mainstream media has a tremendous amount of power to sway people's opinions, even though people don't trust it. It's kind of a bizarre paradox in the world we live in.
Yeah. We still want to know what they're talking about, right? We don't majority of people don't trust what they're saying, but we want to know what they're saying so we can understand what people are thinking, what other people are thinking.
I mean, if the mainstream media had been benevolent to Robert Kennedy Jr., his numbers would be much higher than they currently are. I firmly believe that. I mean, every mainstream outlet has done multiple hatchet jobs on Robert Kennedy Jr. From his wife that committed suicide to his stance on vaccines. I mean, they've labeled him to be a conspiracy theorist. And once you're labeled a conspiracy theorist, then it's pretty much game over.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting in 1967, there were a lot of people that didn't believe the Warren Commission. And the Warren Commission investigated John Kennedy's death, and they said that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin.
Right.
The lone nutter. And the majority of Americans in 1967 did not believe the Warren Commission. Now it's
really?
Now it's around 66%, but I think it was even higher at that point. So the CIA came out with a dispatch in 1967, quote unquote dispatch, that was sent to editors and other people that had juice. And it said, we're going to position people that think that the Warren Commission was wrong. We're going to position them as conspiracy theorists.
Right.
And now the New York Times and the Washington Post use the term conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist once a year before that 67 dispatch. But after that 67 dispatch, it just escalated exponentially. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. People don't understand that when they use that term,
it was created by the CIA.
it was weaponized by the CIA.
Right, weaponized by the CIA.
And
become popular by them.
And they're drinking the Kool-Aid. They don't even understand that. And my family doesn't really read anything that I write. They're very...
Congratulations.
Well, actually, I had a brother-in-law who read my books, but he wasn't, I don't think, the best husband to my sister. Anyway, those things aside, most people do not want to believe these things that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Americans do not want to believe that Jeffrey Epstein was covered up by the government. A lot of, I mean, it's really in our face that the government covered up Jeffrey Epstein, the federal government, from Alexander Acosta being told to stand down to William Barr, and it's going on now with the U.S. Attorney Damian Williams. He was the guy that put Ghislaine Maxwell on trial, and he was nominated by Biden, and he is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, which is probably the most powerful federal law enforcement officer in New York City. And it's a post that, I mean, cabinet members and judges and a lot of people have been that. If you're the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, That's very prestigious. It
Yes.
doesn't get any more prestigious in federal law enforcement.
Now, what does it mean that he was the one who prosecuted Ghislaine?
Okay, so he was the guy. Ghislaine Maxwell's trial was carefully choreographed. They only called 4 witnesses, and those 4 witnesses had only been by Maxwell and Epstein.
Okay.
They didn't
No
know
other people.
They didn't know about these other power brokers, and let me reframe myself. They didn't know about these other. They hadn't been by the power brokers, so when they testified, they could only testify about Epstein and Maxwell. And what's really interesting, Damian Williams. I mean, he's part of the. He's part of a very corrupt Democratic machine. He is the guy that is leading the P. Diddy investigation right now. He's the guy that's
Damian Williams.
Damian Williams. The guy that covered up Epstein and Maxwell is the same guy that's going to be covering up P. Diddy. Those warrants that were executed in Los Angeles and also in Miami on P. Diddy's home, where they came out with a bunch of electronics. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's amazing is they were launched by Damian Williams. Now, why would a guy in New York City be executing search warrants in L.A. and Miami? And I'll tell you why. It's because I believe that P. Diddy, well, his homes were wired for audiovisual blackmail. Yes. And there were politicians and big-time celebrities and athletes. And I believe that people got compromised at his parties. And there has to be damage control. And Damian Williams is the damage control. Because Damian Williams is prosecuting that case, we know the fix is in. We don't know exactly what the fix is going to be, but I'll give you an idea of what the fix is going to be.
Okay.
P. Diddy is going to go down. Maybe some other lower echelon guys are going to go down. But none of the people that were... And there's been 8 lawsuits launched at P. Diddy. Okay. 8 civil lawsuits.
Okay.
2 of them were minors at the time. And then Little Rod, the 5th lawsuit, he was a hip-hop producer. He said that P. Diddy always had minors. There were always minors there at his parties. And P. Diddy had these, like, what he called freak-offs, where I guess it was like a Roman bacchanal kind of a thing. So what's really... When you dig into P. Diddy's past, it's kind of interesting because he started Bad Boy Records with Clive Davis. Mm-hmm. And Clive Davis is a dirty, dirty guy. And people don't really know this about Clive Davis. There was a documentary about Clive Davis, and it showed that he was this benign octogenarian. I mean, it was like an infomercial. But Clive Davis... What's amazing, if you look into his criminal past, it's kind of mind-boggling. He's been indicted 3 times by the IRS for not paying his taxes, and then he's been indicted 3 times for fraud, not paying his taxes. Mm-hmm. And what payola is it's against the law, but it's radio station record companies giving money to radio stations to play
music.
Yeah. And it was outlawed in 1960. And Clive Davis was, when he was president of ABC Records, he was in the biggest payola swindle of all time. It was like $250,000 that they were giving to radio stations. Wow. And then what's really interesting, now we're not done with Clive Davis yet. There was a Genovese guy named Patsy Falcone who got busted with bringing 22 pounds of heroin into the United States. And the feds started digging into Falcone, and then they found that he was in charge of all these shell companies. And he was in business with Clive Davis. Clive Davis, as the president of ABC Records, was giving money to these shell companies that Falcone oversaw, and then they were dividing the proceeds. So with all this criminality that I have told you that Clive Davis has perpetrated, he has not spent 1 day in jail. Mm. The dude has not spent 1 day in jail. So he was the guy that started Bad Boy Records with P. Diddy in 1993.
Danny, do you dream
What are you doing? Why are you thinking about this instead of punching the show?
Don't worry about Nick. He's on pause. Listen, sleep escapes me like happiness from a melted candy bar on your sweaty onion fingers. Nighttime sucks for me.
3 words, Steve. That's Beam Dream Powder. And it's the greatest thing since I've learned that sleeping in is just adult nap time. Here's the thing about sleep. It's foundational for your health. If you don't sleep good, you don't live good, and you'll end up like Steve.
Waking up for me is like my body's way of saying, joke's on you.
Good sleep is both mental and physical, and your performance depends on it.
Just mix Dream into hot water or milk before bed, maybe a little cookie, and then you'll wake up every morning feeling like it's Christmas every night.
No cookies, Steve. Dream Powder is sugar-free, so you don't have to sacrifice your health for a nice sleepy time routine. Listen, there's lots of things you can do to help your sleep. Natural things like not staring at your computer screen or your phone screen too late into the night, not eating late, not drinking, a bunch of coffee before you go to bed, obvious things. But when I have a week full of activities that I have to get done, as well as taking care of the kids and the family and all that stuff, and I don't have time to dial in my nighttime routine, Beam is like a parachute for me. Beam is the perfect nighttime cocktail to ensure you sleep like a baby and feel great the next day.
Other sleep aids can cause next-day grogginess, but Dream contains a powerful all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, epigenin, and melatonin to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed.
And that's why I like them, because their natural ingredients help support all 4 sleep stages.
And today, our listeners get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder, their science-backed healthy hot cocoa for sleep with no sugar added.
Great sleep has never tasted better, especially when you're sipping on that hot, salty chocolate caramel flavor. So if you want to help support the show and try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Danny and use the code Danny at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/DANNY and use the code Danny for up to 40% off. It's linked below. Now back to the show. This sounds just like the guys the Wall Street guys and the guys from Apollo Global that were tied up with Jeffrey Epstein. Carl Icahn, freaking Leon Black.
Leon Black.
All these guys.
Well, it cracks me up. Leon Black gave Jeffrey Epstein, I think,
$158 million.
$158 million.
Yeah.
And the cover story is because he helped them with their taxes.
Estate planning and taxes, right? And the argument is his argument was that if he could have saved Leon $500 million, then it's definitely worth $158 million.
And if you believe that, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn that I can sell you. I'll give you a reasonable price on it.
Well, there was a report that was done, an investigative report that was done on Apollo or was it Drexel, on that whole thing, and it was basically like they did a whole investigation with tons of interviews and all this investigation with like the accounting and all this stuff, and they basically like kept it all secret. They didn't release any of the interviews or anything like that. They basically just concluded that he had ties to Epstein and he did pay Epstein this money and it was for this stuff. And basically he got off. I don't know if he did. I don't know if Leon Black actually did any time. Did he?
He did not.
He did not. No.
None of those guys have done any time. None of the guys that Epstein pandered children to,
right,
have done time.
It seems like, and Apollo Global, their biggest investors are guys from the NBA. I think it was one of the guys who owns the 76ers, another guy who owns the Hawks. And the UAE people, the UAE has a huge investment in Apollo Global, and it seems like, and if you look at the ties with Adnan Khashoggi to Apollo Global and Epstein's ties to Leon Black, it seems like Epstein is a conduit to money that is getting laundered through companies like Apollo Global. And with the other guy, there's this other guy, A.B. Buzzy Krongard, who's a CIA guy who was really invested into there. It seems like with the CIA, with intelligence involvement in Wall Street, in these companies that Epstein is very much a part of, it seems like that these financial institutions are being used as basically like cash swaths to fund things like smuggling, like arms deals, and covert ops.
I mean, there's a long history of that. Like
Yeah.
BCCI was
Yes,
a bank.
BCCI, yeah.
Was a bank that the CIA used to clean its money. It's very dirty money. And before that, there was a book written by Houston. I think he was with the Houston Post at that point. His name was Pete Bruton. And he showed that the savings and loan meltdown in the 80s, he tied a bunch of that to the CIA. That these CIA guys were just plundering the savings and loans, and then they would go belly up, and then the Federal Reserve or the Feds would bail them out. So the CIA, I believe, has been in securities fraud for a very, very long time. And I knew someone who knew William Colby pretty well. He was a former director of the CIA, and he died under mysterious, very, very mysterious circumstances. He was 76 years old in poor health, and he went canoeing in a cold April night without his shoes. So I would say that that's kind of mysterious.
Right.
But Colby was kind of interesting because during the Church Commission that was digging into the illegalities of the CIA, there was Dick Helms who kept his mouth shut, but Colby said a lot of things. I mean, he could have said more, but he did say a lot of things. He felt that Americans were entitled to know what their clandestine services were getting away with.
Oh, we had a guy in here who actually met with him right before he died. Who was that?
That was John Newman.
John Newman. John Newman was the one who told us about that. You know who John Newman is? He's the guy who wrote a bunch of books about JFK. Yeah, he was the guy who originally told me about that story.
So with William Colby, he had said to this guy that I know, he had some regrets about the CIA. And what the CIA did, according to Colby, was they created funding mechanisms. They felt like fighting communism was too important to be left to politicians. So they developed various funding mechanisms. And so they could be completely autonomous. And Colby felt that that was a huge mistake in retrospect, because now the CIA just has so much money and so much power, it can tell the U.S. attorneys to stand down.
Yeah, it's just I can really see the similarities between what's going on, what happened with Diddy and with Epstein, with the ties, like the guy, the
Damian Williams.
Damian Williams, but also the guy who was the record executive who worked with P.
Clive
Diddy,
Williams.
Clive Davis.
Clive Davis.
Clive Davis. Yeah.
And it's kind of amazing because P. Diddy has gotten away with so much stuff. And I believe, this is just my surmise, I believe that Clive Davis has been on the yellow brick road forever. Probably an FBI informant, definitely some kind of, there's no way that you can commit as many felonies as Clive Davis has committed and not spend a day in jail. If you or I got indicted for tax fraud and tax evasion or making shell companies that were run by heroin dealers that were hooked up with the Genovese crime family, if you or I got busted for that, we would do some time. I mean, we would go to jail. There's no doubt about it.
The more you learn about this shit, it just seems like the whole world is still run by the mafia. It's just they're just now in cahoots with intelligence.
Well, I think that the mafia, it's kind of interesting. I've had some very strange days in my life, but one of the strangest was I went and interviewed the former boss of the Lucchese crime family at the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. His name is Anthony Gaspipe Casso.
Anthony Gaspipe Casso.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you said gas pipe to him, your family would be contacting a mortician relatively quickly. He did not like being called.
Oh, he didn't like that.
No, he didn't like being called
Look at this guy. Wow.
There he is. So this is kind of interesting. I wrote an article. I went and saw a gas pipe in Florence, Colorado. That prison is it's in a mountain.
Right.
And the 396 guys or 400 guys that the United States has the most antipathy for are there. Like Kaczynski is there, Ramzi Youssef, the first guy was there, Tim McVeigh was there. Yes.
Isn't El Chapo there?
No, I don't think he's at that one. I think he's at Joliet, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
Don't quote me. So those guys are in solitary 24/7. That prison is designed to deconstruct you. And when they get yard time, they're in little plexiglass booths, the size of the size of their cells. So, I mean, there's no human
Outside?
Yeah.
In a plexiglass box?
They're in a little plexiglass booth. Yeah.
Wow.
And Gas Pipe used to have yard time at the same time as Ted Kaczynski, and he told me that Ted Kaczynski would run laps in his little and I guess Ted was keeping in shape for a while. I don't know if he's still keeping in shape, but anyway. Wow. So Gas Pipe told me this amazing story that he had hired 2 NYPD detectives for hits, highly decorated NYPD detectives. And I started to look into it. And when you're investigating stuff, you just kind of turn over rocks.
Yep.
Little ones, and then little ones lead to bigger ones. And then I got a document, an FBI document, that said that these cops were involved in murders. And FBI 302 from Sammy the Bull Gravano. And then I came across other evidence. And this was in 2000, and I couldn't sell that article. I mean, because these were highly decorated cops, and Gas Pipe was a psychopath. But just because someone is a psychopath, it doesn't mean that they're pathological liars. I mean, they'll lie when it's convenient, for sure.
Yes.
But anyway, I knew that these guys were dirty. And ultimately, they got indicted in 2005. And I was having breakfast with a friend of mine. I was saying, man, I tried to get this story out 5 years ago. And he goes, well, now you can finally sell it. So I did finally sell it, and Playboy published it. It's on my...
Playboy published it, wow.
Yeah, it's on my website. And what Gas Pipe and I, we had a correspondence, and he said, the mob will never be what it was because it was able to control senators and congressmen, but it will never go away. That's
right.
That was Gas Pipe's thoughts on the mob.
Yeah. Well, it's just evolving now, right?
Well, I think you've got all kinds of other organized crime entities.
Well, right.
That, I mean, the mob used to control all of them, but the mob doesn't have, I believe, the power to control like Russian organized crime. Mm-hmm. And Russian organized crime isn't as centralized as the mafia. I mean, you got a lot of cowboys doing a lot of different things. There's kind of a loose hierarchy, but you've got a lot of cowboys doing a lot of different things. So
right. Well, it makes me think about some of these, like what's going on with some of these like big aerospace contractors and these defense contractors. You know, that's one of the things Tim Burchett has been talking about. He's been trying to get a bill passed, and there's two guys from Ohio that were lobbied heavily with Wright Patterson or two of the big private defense contractors in Ohio. I think one of them is Lockheed, and maybe the other one's Booz Allen. I can't remember exactly what they were.
I think Booz Allen's probably in Illinois, and Lockheed is in Washington, but I could be wrong.
Can you find out who the two aerospace contractors are in Ohio? I think Wright Patterson was involved somehow with this, or with
you got Northrop Grumman.
Maybe it was Northrop.
Yeah.
So maybe though, like he was trying to pass a bill, and then the two guys that blocked it were the two guys from Ohio that were heavily lobbied by those defense contractors. And you know, it makes me wonder when he's talking about people being paid off and get involved in honey traps, how much shit is going on behind the scenes with these big private organizations, you know, being in charge of some of these honey traps or some of these blackmail campaigns with congressmen and senators and trying to influence the law that way.
I mean, that's what Burchett said, that special interests were compromising. Mm-hmm. And I know from my own experience that the CIA has honey traps too. So as I said earlier, if love is blind, lust is deaf, dumb, and quadriplegic. Mm-hmm. And that lust and arrogance makes smart people very, very stupid. And our politicians have a potent alchemy of lust and arrogance, which makes them very, very stupid. Mm. Someone like Clinton, he's a very brilliant guy, but he cannot control his libido. I mean, the guy, and as I've also said, when libido drives the car, it ends up in the wrong garage. And Clinton's libido has ended up in the wrong garage repeatedly. He's just been saved because he's dirty. I got a hold of a blackmail photographer when I was writing the Franklin scandal. And it was relative. After I'd been in it about a year or so, I was still trying to figure it all out. And I kind of said, well, how does this work? And he goes, once you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht. And it's a beautiful yacht. And it's a beautiful day. And you're on that yacht and you can have anything you want. But if you decide to get off that yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. So once you're compromised, you can have anything you want, but there's zero initiative to get off the yacht because the people on the yacht are going to bring you down.
That's a very good way to put it. A very, very good way to put it. And then there's also, and then that yacht is also wrapped up in a huge hornet's nest of billions of dollars that wants more. They want more power. They want more fame. That's why they're buying up like there's I know Ari Emanuel is somehow wrapped up in a lot of this stuff, and with like sports teams and with Saudi Arabia having this crazy huge run at buying at like the Live golf thing and investing in all this sports stuff. It's everywhere you look. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous.
Well, our government is very corrupt. As I said earlier, the congressional approval rating is 13%. And I started an organization. It's called Epstein Justice. And we've got some really good people on the advisory board. Your listeners or viewers can go to epsteinjustice.com. And what we want is relatively simple. We want a commission that's going to look into two things. A, we want to know why the government covered up child trafficking. And B, we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. And that is exactly what Epstein Justice is about. And we're starting to get momentum. We became a 501c3 last July. And we're building up. It's kind of exciting for us.
What do you think? What do you think about Steve Bannon just having to report to prison recently? And what do you think his involvement in this whole thing is?
I wouldn't want to speculate. So
never came across him or anyone involved with him in any of your research?
In my research, no. I mean, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're innocent or they haven't been compromised. It just means that their names haven't come up in my research.
Right.
But I mean, there's a former prime minister that Jeffrey Epstein used to give little girls to that was very violent to these little girls. I mean, and that's the other thing about these guys.
Which prime minister?
He was a prime minister of a Middle Eastern country.
You can't say his name?
Well, I mean, it would be, I would feel uncomfortable saying it.
Oh, so it's not public?
It's not public, no. But I talked to a Epstein victim who said that he was very violent to her. And the reason why I'm not coughing up his name is because I don't want her to run into problems.
Okay, I understand.
Because the dude has some major juice.
Okay, we don't want anyone getting chopped up.
We do not. But you saw that with the Franklin network too. These guys become increasingly violent, or some of them do, and they have to be more violent to get a thrill. And there is a book called The Snow Murders. There was a huge network in Detroit, and Francis Sheldon was the guy who ran it, and it was the first pet island. It was before Epstein's. He had a island called Fox Island, and he would fly kids to this island, and they would be in use for. I mean, really, really sick. But 4 of those kids ended up dead alongside highways, and there were, according to law enforcement, there were probably at least 5 people that knew that those kids had been murdered. I mean, or had taken part in it. So, and that's the extreme, is that some of these guys, it gets increasingly violent, and then they end up killing kids. And I know that this sounds horrific, but if you read a book called The Snow Murders or The Snow Killings, the author makes a very profound case for it.
Where was this island?
It was in northern Michigan, actually not too far from Interlaken, where Epstein and Barr went to art camp.
Really?
Yeah. Very close to Interlaken.
What is it about these billionaires that why are they so obsessed with underage girls? Why do they have to be underage girls?
That was something I really tried to understand when I first went into this very dark realm. And I talked to some psychologists. Mm-hmm. Actually, I know a number of psychologists at this point, and that have dealt with these type of victims. And some of them have even, and I talked to a psychologist that had dealt with guys that had these proclivities that were actually trying to get better. It was bothering them.
Why could my thing is like, why couldn't it just be like a younger woman who's of age?
Because a lot of these guys, I mean, I don't know how expensive prostitutes are, but let's say that they're.
Depends how hot they are.
Let's say the hottest one is, what would you say, $5,000 an hour? That'd probably be high, but.
I guess.
So these guys could have 20 of them at the same time. But they go to forbidden fruit. Okay, so that's one mechanism, psychological mechanism. The other one is maybe they've been too. And a lot of Americans,
right.
Where Americans are very naive is, according to the Centers for Disease Control, and this is a very conservative number, 25% of American girls have been
25%.
And 5% of American boys. We're talking underage. So we're talking like 50 million Americans have been as underage boys or girls.
So there is a psychological disorder that is very much real inside people where they have this inkling for the forbidden fruit. But so because they're underage and because it's illegal, that's what draws them to this.
I mean, I'm sure that that's a psychological mechanism, but if you look at all the boys and girls in the United States that get as underage kids, I mean, that's a lot of people, man.
Yeah.
It's
a lot of people.
There's a lot of people, underage boys and girls in the United States of America. And I'm sure that that's the forbidden fruit thing, but then I think some people are just whacked. I mean, that's what they want. Somebody that they can completely control.
And the majority of them are really successful billionaires and world leaders.
No, actually, all social strata. Every social strata
really
has child. Yeah, every social strata.
Okay.
The ones that we're talking about, they have children with impunity. The ones that live in trailer parks, get 15 to 20 years.
You don't hear about that.
Yeah, but the guys that we're talking about, they get. Nothing happens to them.
Right.
They've got their get out of jail free card.
It's dark shit, man. Really fucking dark shit.
Well, I've been swimming in this sewer for 22 years, and sometimes I think, but
it's amazing you've only had your life threatened once.
There's been some other pretty funky stuff.
Funky stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've had very strange phone calls over the years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you ever had anyone offer you a lot of money?
No, but I've had some government agencies take some interest in me. I'll go that far.
Really?
Yeah.
Overtly,
very much overtly.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
How so?
Well, I didn't do anything, but I don't really want to go too far down that road.
Oh, wow.
Because
that's scary.
Those government agencies,
they're listening to us right now.
Well, you never know. I mean, you don't want
right.
I've been very fortunate that I've been able to do what I've been able to do.
Yes.
And I still have a lot to do. I just, I don't, there are certain headaches.
There's very few people like you who are unafraid to go down this rabbit hole.
Well, actually, there is fear. I mean, people that are crazy don't have fear. And well, I mean, some people would argue that I might be crazy,
Right.
but there is fear. It's just overcoming the fear. When I first started cutting my teeth on this, and I saw that, and it was the Franklin Network, and I saw these kids had been used and abused with impunity, I just felt like I had to do something about it. Now, there's a lot of people that can see what I saw and just walk away from it. But I'm not wired that way. I don't know why it is. I wasn't able to look away.
Where did this crazy idea of using kids as blackmail for intelligence and for people in high power, political power, where did this start? And where did this all come from? Is there some place that we know in history that this sort of practice originated?
I mean, political blackmail, honey traps, are as old as politics itself. I'll give you an example. Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old, and her husband was blackmailing him. And now we think of Alexander Hamilton as this hero, but yeah, he was getting blackmailed. And then there was this muckraking journalist who found out about Alexander Hamilton having an affair with this 23-year-old and getting blackmailed by her husband. And he outed him and wrote about it. And it severely tainted Alexander Hamilton. And Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton really disliked each other. So the muckraking journalist felt that he would surely get an appointment in Jefferson's administration because he outed Alexander Hamilton for having this affair. But when Jefferson became president, he did not give this muckraker an appointment. So the muckraker published an article about Jefferson having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. And actually, DNA has shown that Jefferson did, in fact, have foster a number of children with Sally Hemings.
Jesus Christ, man.
So it goes, I mean, and we're just talking the U.S. now, the beginning of the U.S., but it goes back very far.
Oh, yeah.
And
human trafficking was big time in ancient Rome and ancient Greece.
Well, I mean, Tiberius was, and I don't know but I have read accounts of this, that Tiberius, the Roman emperor, would like to kill little boys and throw them off a cliff.
Like to kill them and throw them off a cliff.
Yeah. So I don't know. Some people have said it's true. Some people have said it's not true. But yeah, I mean, these type of pathologies are as old as humans themselves. And it's unfortunate. But now it's a different kind of a game. And I'll give you an example of two politicians that I know that have been compromised. One was a senator, and one was in the House of Representatives.
Currently or no?
No, they got booted up. Larry Craig was a Republican from Idaho. And he was a family values guy, very conservative. Actually, I think that he might have had the worst record of voting against gay rights of any person in the Senate. And he had been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years. And part of it as in the House of Representatives, but then he ultimately became a senator. And I wrote a book called Confessions of a D.C. Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail, and about a guy running a gay escort service that was giving escorts to CIA assets to compromise politicians. Well, Craig was getting escorts from this guy. And there was a documentary.
From who?
From Henry Vincent, the guy who I wrote the book with. And Craig was getting escorts from Henry Vincent, but there was a documentary called Outraged by Kirby Dick about how really conservative, closeted guys vote against gay rights. And he found other guys that Craig was giving money to for male escorts.
Male escorts.
Yeah.
That's so funny. That's so true.
So here's what happened to Craig. So here's a guy that's been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, and he's getting escorts from a guy that I wrote the book with, and he's getting escorts from other people. And what he got busted in a Minneapolis. There's an international airport in Minneapolis. I'm from Minneapolis, and he was. I guess there's like this gay nomenclature where someone hits their foot. If they're sitting on the commode and they hit their foot on the ground, and then that signals to the other guy that they're hot, that he's hot to trot. So that's what happened with Larry Craig. He got busted in a bathroom in the Minneapolis airport trying to pick up a Vice Squad cop.
Wow. That's fucking crazy. There's that famous Joe Rogan joke where he says there's only two people who hate gays. Morons and guys who secretly love dick but won't admit it.
Well, here's the thing with I go to Minneapolis about once a year. I mean, that's where I'm from. And I was sitting on the commode once, and some guy was in the booth next to me slapping his foot. And I thought he had a neurological disorder. I'm just really glad I didn't say, "Hey, could I help you? Do you need some help?"
Oh, God.
And let's talk about Dennis Hastert. Okay, so he was the Speaker of the House.
Okay.
Constitutionally, third most powerful man in the country. He had been boys going.
What year?
He was the Speaker of the House from 1999 to 2006, but he'd been in the House for quite some time. He was a strong-arm guy. He really strong-armed people into voting the way that he felt like they should vote. Now, he had been a wrestling coach in high school, and he started kids back then, like 40 years earlier. And the FBI knew what he was up to because there was a FBI whistleblower that said that they knew about Dennis Hastert's shadow life. So when he was the Speaker of the House, he was engaged in this and nothing happened to him. But after he got out, one of his victims started blackmailing him. And he ultimately started taking money out of his bank account under false pretenses and giving it to this blackmail victim, or this victim of his who was blackmailing him. But the FBI went after Hastert instead of this kid or this victim, which is kind of interesting because the FBI could have just stopped it right there and said, if you blackmail Dennis Hastert, we're going to put you away forever. But they went after Hastert instead. And I've always wondered, so I think using the yacht analogy, what happened to Hastert? Why did he decide to get off the yacht?
Right.
I don't know. I think he got too greedy. He was making millions of dollars. And he had this consulting business and he was making millions of dollars. And I think that some powerful people wanted a cut. And he just said, "No, I'm Dennis Hastert. Go to hell." And that's what happened to Dennis Hastert.
Wow. Serial child. Federal judge imposed a sentence of 15 months in prison, 2 years supervised release. That's it.
15 months. Holy shit.
15 months and $250,000 fine.
And I've tried to get a hold of him. I've got his cell phone number, but he doesn't really want to talk to me.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah, man. It seems like a insurmountable task to take down these networks because it seems like the people that are involved in these networks around the world.
Well, the thing with Epstein justice, and I believe, now I might be deluded, but I believe that we can do this. I believe you've got a congressional approval rating that's horrible. 87% of Americans do not think that their congressmen and congresswomen are acting in their best interest.
Right.
They know that something is wrong. Look at our presidential candidates.
Yes.
I mean, only a very foul, perfidious system gives us a choice like that. Right. I mean, I really believe that.
Yeah,
so
I do too.
With what we're dealing with now, I really believe that if we can get the government, if we can get enough Americans to get behind Epstein justice and show, the government has covered this up. Now, when you have a disease, and our society is thoroughly diseased, if you've got a disease, there's three protocols. There's awareness, there's action, there's awareness, there's acceptance, there's action. Now, a lot of people are aware of Epstein. I mean, I think most of them, but they haven't quite accepted that the government covered it up. So when we get to that point, then we can have action. And that's what we're trying to achieve with Epstein justice.
I think, do you see a similarity here in the Epstein case to the JFK case, in a sense that, like John Newman talks about, he refers to the whole JFK story of his murder. He thinks Dealey Plaza is a big distraction. Every documentary, most of the books, they all just want to talk about Dealey Plaza and who was the shooter. His point is that's an intentional distraction from who was really behind him getting murdered. And that was the Joint Chiefs who were trying to insinuate, they were trying to start a nuclear war, and essentially JFK got in the way of it and they had to get rid of him. And no one likes to talk about all the stuff that's downstream from what happened in Dealey Plaza. When it comes to Epstein, everyone only cares about whether he killed himself or not.
Yeah, and that's the problem that I have. And I've had networks approach me and say, we'd like you to talk about Epstein's death. And I say, that's a red herring.
Yes.
I don't want to talk about Epstein's death. I want to talk about all these victims that were with impunity. But they don't want to do that.
Right.
Vice called me and said, we'd like to interview you about Epstein's death. And I said, I don't really have anything to say about Epstein's death.
Yeah, it seems intentional.
I'm not Epstein. My thoughts on Epstein are, there was, in the network that I wrote about, there were two guys. And one guy kept his mouth shut and he didn't get busted for any kinds of child. He got busted for financial crimes, and he did 10 years, and then he was let out, and he was taken care of. His name was Lawrence King. Now, there was another guy who had a big ego and couldn't keep his mouth shut, and he committed suicide at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston. And I believe it was said to him, either you can kill yourself, his name was Craig Spence, and I believe that someone in intelligence said to Craig Spence, you've done a lot of good work for us. We've been able to compromise a lot of guys, but you got to go now, because there was just too much media on him. Like with Epstein, there was too much media on Epstein.
Right.
For blackmailers need anonymity, because once they're outed as blackmailers, they're useless.
Yes.
They're not going to be able to. And so I think that the same deal was cut with Spence and also Epstein is, if you don't kill yourself, we'll help you.
Right, right. And even too, to make it more of a distraction, let's say that let's kill him, and let's not make it obvious. Let's make it look like, let's do like the hyoid bone in his neck was broken, which indicates that it was really severe trauma that you couldn't do by just hanging yourself. Even the noose, it looks like it was the bed sheet that they used to tie. There wasn't obvious that it was even tied to anything. So let's do a sloppy job, a sloppy cover up, so it creates more media controversy just around this moment.
Yeah, that's what I believe with Epstein. And that's why when networks and other people have asked me, do I really want to talk about Epstein's death? And I always say, no. I mean, you've got all these girls.
Does it really fucking matter? Does it really matter if he killed himself or if somebody else killed him? Because if you really do your homework, which you have done, you can find all the people that are fucking entwined in this. And you can find out what the motives are.
Well, here's the thing with Epstein. Okay, so now you had the government covering it up, but now the attorneys, or some of the attorneys, are playing a very instrumental role in covering up Epstein. There was the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, and that was started by Jordana Feldman, who had actually done the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund, and then David Boies, who is a dirty lawyer. David Boies is one of the most powerful lawyers in the world, and he's a very dirty guy. And he uses...
I've heard this guy before.
Are you familiar with the Israeli mercenaries, Black Cube?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so he uses Black Cube. He uses...
Really?
Yeah, he likes to deploy Black Cube on people. It's remarkable what he's gotten away with. There he is.
Scroll up.
There's Dave.
Let's read the CIA Wikipedia's version of him. He's an American lawyer and chairman of the law firm Boies, Schiller, and Flexner LLP. Boies rose to national prominence for 3 major cases leading the U.S. federal government's successful prosecution of Microsoft in the U.S. versus Microsoft, his unsuccessful representation of Democratic presidential candidate Al Gore in Bush versus Gore, and for successful representation of the plaintiff in Hollingsworth versus Perry, which validated California Proposition 8 banning same-sex marriages.
Boies has also represented various clients in U.S. lawsuits, Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein's victims.
Oh yeah, there. Yeah, we left out the best part. I'm sorry.
But the thing is, okay, so Grace McGowan was one of the first guys. She was in the first wave of actresses that had said that she'd been by Harvey Weinstein.
Mm-hmm.
David Boies deployed Black Cube on Grace McGowan, and Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes,
yeah,
the grifter.
Oh yeah.
He used Theranos on people that were trying to detract from her credibility, and he also used Theranos against the New York Times.
You mean Black Cube?
Black Cube, the Israeli mercenary.
Yeah, he used them to. So what specifically does Black Cube do?
Well, with Rose McGowan, some of them befriended Rose McGowan under false pretenses and tried to get information from her that way. With when he used Black Cube on Harvey Weinstein, they were looking for dirt on various New York Times journalists.
Oh shit!
So,
look at this. Boies' firm reportedly directed the Israeli private intelligence company Black Cube to spy on alleged victims of Harvey Weinstein's sexual abuse, and on the reporters. This is exactly what you were just saying. Who were investigating Weinstein's actions. Over the course of a year, Weinstein had Black Cube and other agencies target or collect info on dozens of individuals and compile psychological profiles. Whoa.
Okay, so David Boies is one of the arbitrators, if not the arbitrator, of the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. He is the one that decides who gets money and who doesn't. 225 women have come forward, and 150 have been offered settlements, and 132 have been given settlements. And Epstein trafficked girls for 25 years. So there's hundreds of them out there.
Yeah.
But they're just too frightened to come forward.
Right.
But here's the thing. There's a couple of things about that Victims Compensation Fund. If you get money from that Victims Compensation Fund, you've got to sign an NDA. So you cannot go after any of the perps.
Right.
So the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, with dirty lawyers like David Boies, is covering up stuff that the government couldn't cover up, because it's making sure that these victims don't go after any of the other perps. And here's another dirty secret about it. Epstein was trafficking. The mainstream media and the government have, settled that the youngest of the Epstein victims was 14. But that's not true. There were actually, we know about two 13-year-olds that got money from the Victims Compensation Fund, or at least litigated. But then there was a newspaper report, it's on my website, that there were 11 and 12-year-olds that Epstein was trafficking. But here it even gets uglier. I've spoken at anti-trafficking conferences. I've got a lot of knowledge about child trafficking, and I've written about child trafficking with academics, and I've spoken at some very large, like the National Center on Exploitation puts on an international summit once a year, and I've spoken at 3 of those summits. So I really have gotten to know trafficking, and then also I've gotten to know a lot of therapists who work with victims that were trafficked. Mm-hmm. And I know 2 therapists, and one of them is highly esteemed, who each one had clients who they believe had been by Epstein et al. When they were under 10 years old. And one described Epstein's home and a park where she used to play by Epstein's home. And I've gotten to know these therapists. I believe them. And here's the thing. When we're talking about people getting more violent and more violent and more violent, well, the other side of that is younger and younger and younger.
Right.
And the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund would not give these young women money because they didn't conform. The therapists believed that they didn't conform to the 14 years or older, because that would have shown that Epstein was, that would really alarm Americans that Epstein was trafficking girls under the age of 10. So that victims' compensation fund is as dirty as the government. It's as dirty as Epstein. It's just dirty.
Good God. What did that guy, what was his name? Burnell?
Jean-Luc Burnell.
Jean-Luc Burnell. Yeah. The interesting thing about that guy is he ended up dying on a Saturday as well as Epstein, right? The slowest news day of the week. I think it was like a Saturday night, and committed suicide, I believe, in the same way that Epstein did.
So,
right?
yeah. Epstein was getting, and Burnell was infamous as a modeling agent for models, but they were tapped into Eastern Europe, and they were buying, not renting. They were buying girls in Eastern Europe, which
from where?
People that are predators know how to get children. I think, like with the Franklin scandal, the two pimps that I wrote about, they were getting a lot of children from Boys Town, the distinguished orphanage on the outskirts of Omaha. So there's a lot of kids out there that do not have parents that end up in orphanages where, and a lot of, like with Boys Town, the number 2 guy was definitely a pedophile. Father James Kelly. So he was compromised. And that's why he was allowing Boys Town kids to go off campus and become part of this network. So if you know how to, these guys are psychopaths. And if someone is going to give someone 10,000 or 15 or whatever for a kid, they'll find kids. It's brutal. It's very dark. It's very brutal.
Yeah, Jean-Luc Burnell. Was Jean-Luc Burnell tied into any of these Wall Street firms at all, like BCCI or Drexel Lambert or Apollo Global?
I think that he was just a guy that got the girls.
He was just a girls guy. Okay.
Yeah. The financial machinations, I don't think that he was part of that.
Right. Yeah, the crazy thing about BCCI is that, like, some of the names that were on the index books for BCCI was like JFK, FDR, the Hunt brothers, Saddam Hussein, George Bush. Like, there were some big names involved in that bank, considering what they were doing.
It was an amazing cover-up.
Yeah.
If you look at all the illegalities that were involved, that was an amazing cover-up.
It was so amazing and so far-reaching.
Yeah. Much like Epstein.
Right.
Very far-reaching. And the government is kind of amazing the way that it can. I'll give you an example of an amazing cover-up. When David Boies started to take on Epstein's victims as clients, he brought in Stan Pottinger. And Pottinger was an associate attorney general. And I call him the Forrest Gump of cover-ups. If there's a cover-up, Stan Pottinger is there. Like with Wounded Knee, a bunch of Native Americans took over Wounded Knee, which had been the site of a slaughter. And Stan Pottinger went after them, and the two Russell Means and Dennis Banks were the head of the American Indian movement, and Stan Pottinger went after them really hard. But the judge found that the feds were lying about a number of different things, and he dropped all the charges against him. Stan Pottinger was also married, or a boyfriend to Gloria Steinem for like 9 years. And Steinem was a CIA asset. It's amazing that all these women that look up to Steinem and they see her as the pinnacle of women's liberation. Well, actually, she was CIA. Now, she said that she stopped getting money from the CIA in 1961, but I've come across an article that says that she she was getting money from the CIA throughout the 1960s.
Wow.
And there was, according to Ari Ben Menashe, who was a Israeli spy,
right,
there was, and well, actually, Pottinger was part of the Iran-Contra cover-up. And October Surprise, are you familiar with the October Surprise?
Yes.
Okay.
There was the hostages that
Yes.
bless you. The hostages that were over there, and then they didn't want to release him until after he won the presidency.
Okay, so the CIA,
right? Is that right or no?
William Casey and George Bush made a deal with the Iranians. And they said, if you keep the hostages till after Ronald Reagan is elected president, we'll sell you cheap arms. Mm-hmm. And we were selling arms to Saddam Hussein, and he was having a war against the Iranians. So we were selling arms to both sides. Right. But that was called the October Surprise. And what's really interesting, Stan Pottinger was in on the October Surprise, according to Ari Ben-Menashe. And that was an amazing cover-up because there were actually congressional subcommittees that looked into it and concluded that it didn't exist, even though the New York Times in March published an article that said that there was an October Surprise. So finally, all these years later, but it's amazing how you can have so many congressmen driven in one way to say that there was no October Surprise when there so obviously was. But Stan Pottinger, who ended up representing these Epstein victims with David Boies, he was busted helping Iranians get arms, showing Iranians how to smuggle arms from the United States to Iran without getting in any trouble. And they had him on, this is kind of, actually, it's humorous. It's tragic, but it's humorous. Our Justice Department had tapes of him telling these Iranians how best to smuggle arms into Iran without getting busted.
Really?
And that paragon of integrity, Rudolph Giuliani, was the U.S. attorney overseeing that case, and they lost the tapes of Stan Pottinger. Now, you would think that they would come up with something more creative.
Right.
But anyway, so the tapes were lost, and Stan walked, and then he started representing all these Epstein victims. So it's very obvious that Epstein was definitely intelligence, and then intelligence assets were brought in to make sure that the cover-up was on the other side.
It seems also like it wasn't just one intelligence service. It seems like there was a ton of them. It seemed like it was a combination of CIA, Mossad, Saudi, like at least those three, right?
Well, you know, people ask me, was the Mossad involved? And I say to them, I don't know. I mean, it could have been, but here's the thing about that. There's no way the CIA is going to let the Mossad compromise American politicians on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence. Uh-huh. I mean, there's no way. Well, because the Israelis rely on us so heavily for armaments that the Mossad and the CIA are going to work together on that. I don't think the Mossad is going to compromise American politicians.
But the Mossad is so much better than the CIA. They're so much more efficient than the CIA, and I think that's one of the things that the CIA is frustrated about.
I don't know. The CIA can be very effective. I mean, just talk to Guatemala and Chile and Indonesia, and
for sure,
it just goes on and on. I mean, when the CIA really wants to foment a coup, they get rid of guys. So and they specialize in regime changes. So the CIA can be very effective.
That's a great point. They have been very effective. But when it comes to American politics, I don't think there's anyone more effective than the Mossad. If you talk, there was a recent interview that came out with a congressman. He did it. I forget his name. You could probably find it, Steve. He did an interview with Tucker Carlson, and he was basically telling Tucker, he's like, every single one of us has a CIA or a handler from Israel. Or it was the what's the organization called? The APEC. We all have our own APEC handlers.
Yeah, I mean,
so, and then John Mearsheimer, wrote that whole book about the Israel lobby and how Israel has so much influence over our politics and our laws and everything involving our media and all this stuff, even to their own detriment.
I think that they work together. This is kind of interesting. When I was talking to Gaspipe all those years ago in his subterranean digs. the Russian mafia had this amazing scam where, so like a gallon of gasoline was taxed 25 cents at that point. And what the Russian mafia did was they would sell all this gasoline and they wouldn't pay the tax, and then they would declare bankruptcy. So what happened was we changed our laws where the wholesalers had to pay the tax on the gasoline instead of the retailers. And what the Russians were doing is they created a daisy chain of companies that would defer the tax and defer the tax and defer the tax. And then you'd end up with Juan Gonzalez in Tijuana that had to pay all the taxes on the gasoline. And what Gaspipe told me, and this was my first real inkling of how dirty the Mossad was, that there was a Mossad guy that was working with the Colombo family, and he shot this Colombo mafia guy in the back of the head, and then Gaspipe, because they made like $1 billion on this. It was an amazing scam. And the Russians started doing it, and then all the American crime families, followed them. And so Joseph Reich, a Mossad guy, was part of this scam, and he shot a guy, I can't think of the gangster's name, and we wanted to extradite him, but Israel wouldn't do it. But then Israel tried the guy in an Israel court, and amazingly, an Israel court didn't find a Mossad guy guilty of murder.
Wow. So, who was the guy, I think we talked about this on the phone, who was the Israeli spy who was in prison? He was in a U.S. prison, and then they tried to get Clinton, I think it was, Israel tried to get Clinton to release him back to Israel. Clinton couldn't do it, and then Trump actually ended up getting him out. And then not only that, but it was the billionaire. We talked about this person on the phone. He was a billionaire who owned an NBA team. He died, and then his wife is now the one who just gave Trump $100 million. It was an exchange for the liberation of Miriam Adelson. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So Miriam Adelson's husband was the one. I think he gave Trump during his first campaign like $10 million or something, and then Trump got this fucking Israeli spy out of prison and sent him back, and then literally flew the guy back on Adelson's jet.
Pardoned.
Back to Israel.
Pardoned. Yeah.
And now Miriam Adelson just gave Trump $100 million. And one of the contingents of that $100 million was to give them liberate the West Bank or something like that, a genocide in the West Bank, essentially.
Well, it's interesting. I interviewed Ari Ben-Menashe on my podcast, and Israel tried to say he wasn't an Israeli spy, but he's definitely an Israeli spy. And actually, our government said that there was an October surprise, because he said he participated in the October surprise. He met with Pottinger, and our government said there was an October surprise, but now we're conceding that there is an October surprise.
Right.
And he's a spy, so a former spy, or maybe it's difficult to know with guys like that. But he said, but the New York Times corroborated this. The Israelis were aware of that attack for over a year. Or for around a year before it actually went down.
Wow.
And Ari Ben-Menashe told me that, and then all of a sudden the New York Times came out with an article about it. So he has been corroborated on a number of different points.
And you want to talk about Israeli intelligence versus American intelligence, Mossad versus CIA, who's more effective? Yeah, we've taken over a lot of countries. We've been a part of a lot of revolutions. But what do you make of Israeli influence over the people that are running for president in the United States? Like Trump just getting $100 million from the Adelsons, or I don't know how much, but I know Biden's somehow influenced by them. But every one of our people that are running for president is influenced by Israel to a huge degree. It's not the case the other way around, as far as I'm aware.
I think that Netanyahu is susceptible to being compromised. That's what I believe. I believe that our politicians in the upper echelon are compromised, and so are the Israeli politicians.
By who? By us?
By either us or Israeli intelligence.
By Israeli. Okay.
The last Israeli prime minister that really wanted to work out a peace between the Palestinians and Israel, his name was Yitzhak Rabin, and he was assassinated. The other guys, they obviously haven't.
Right.
And Ehud Barak, who is one of the liberals, I mean,
Met with Epstein.
well, he did a lot more than meet with Epstein. I mean, he actually stayed in Epstein's apartment building.
Right.
Epstein gave him a bunch of money, and I'm sure that he was involved. I've been told that he was involved with some of the girls. So Ehud Barak is probably a very compromised guy.
What about Bill Gates?
Now, this is kind of interesting with Bill Gates. The media, the mainstream media, I think the cover story on that is they met in 2011. But there's an article from the a UK newspaper. I can't think of the name of the newspaper, but it was an article that came out in 2001 about Epstein, talking about Epstein's ties to Khashoggi. But that article says, it was the Evening Standard. That article says that Gates and Epstein were doing business in the 90s.
Right.
So our mainstream media, the cover story of 2011, that's either, I mean, what are we to make of that? I mean, why? I mean, I got that article. You can get that article off the internet about Gates and Epstein doing business in the 1990s. Why hasn't our mainstream media reported on that?
Right. That's a good question.
So it's kind of like we're going to decide that Epstein's youngest victim is 19 or is 14, and we're going to decide that Bill Gates met Jeffrey Epstein in 2011. That seems to be how it works.
Right. Okay. Let's transition to Watergate.
One of my favorite topics, Watergate.
Yes.
You know,
You wrote a whole book on this.
I just happened to have a book on Watergate published, so it's kind of strange.
Is it just one book?
I've written one book on Watergate.
Truth About Watergate, and this was published when?
Earlier this year.
Earlier this year, great.
February.
So do you have some new information on Watergate?
What I've got on Watergate is I've taken all there's been a lot of great books on Watergate that have been written, but they're tomes, they're huge, they're complex.
Right.
And what I wanted to do is I wanted to distill Watergate and make it as simple to comprehend as possible. That was my goal. And the book has just about every sentence has a citation. There's 2,238 citations in the book. The narrative is 171 pages, but between the citations and the bibliography, it's like 60 pages. So, and everything that I used is from the mainstream media. I was able to triangulate. There are some really good revisionist Watergate books that have been published by mainstream publishers. So with Watergate, it's kind of interesting. We talked about JFK, the assassination earlier.
Oh, yeah.
When Nixon took office, everybody thought, okay, when Nixon in 1968, when he was campaigning, he was saying...
Going against Rockefeller.
Well, he crushed Rockefeller.
Well, and Rockefeller dropped out, right?
Well, he crushed him, so Rockefeller dropped out. But he said that we should extend olive branches to China and the USSR. And people were thinking that this is just Richard Nixon being cynical, and once he becomes president, he'll become a Cold Warrior again, and he's a leopard that won't change his spots. But that wasn't the case. Nixon actually wanted to open up China rapprochement for diplomatic relations and wanted to do strategic arm limitation talks with the Russians. He wanted to cement his legacy as a peacemaker. He was really dedicated to that. And on his first or second day in office, he came out with National Security Memorandum Decision 2, which sounds like a innocuous bureaucratic directive. But basically what it says is the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the State Department will have absolutely no bearing on my geopolitical moves. So basically he was telling all the hawks to go to hell. And he started conducting clandestine negotiations with China and then Russia. And the hawks were beside themselves. And Nixon actually told the Russians that he was willing to give up Vietnam for the furtherance of the strategic arm limitation talks. And the Joint Chiefs actually started an espionage ring against Nixon. And it was called the Moore-Radford Affair. And the Joint Chiefs conscripted, Thomas Moore was the head of the Joint Chiefs. And they conscripted a yeoman who was part of the National Security Council to steal documents so the Joint Chiefs could understand what was going on with the Nixon administration. Okay. And they had an inside man at the National Security Council, and that was Alexander Haig, because he was giving these documents to this yeoman who was giving it to the head of the Joint Chiefs. And I think, now, this is my belief, if there was so much blowback with Kennedy and the Warren Commission that I feel like the hawks realized that they couldn't kill Nixon. But here's what they did. So they started this espionage ring against Nixon. They started an espionage ring. The Joint Chiefs started an espionage ring against the President of the United States. And the Nixon administration eventually outed it. And then CIA guys, and then it was the CIA's turn, and they just started infiltrating the Nixon administration. Mm-hmm. And Nixon did not order Watergate. Nixon knew nothing about Watergate. The number 2 and 3 guys, John Ehrlichman, H.R. Haldeman was the number 2 guy in the Nixon administration. John Ehrlichman was the number 3 guy. Those guys didn't order Watergate. John Mitchell, who is the Attorney General, didn't order Watergate. But what happened was there were a number of documents that were leaked when Nixon was the president. And they formed a group called the Plumbers, right, to stop leaks. And the Plumbers ultimately were infiltrated by a couple of CIA guys, Howard Hunt and James McCord. And the thing about Watergate, it's a conspiracy within a conspiracy. Because when the Watergate burglars were busted, let me back up a little bit. The Democratic National Committee in the Watergate was on the 6th floor.
Yes.
And it was connected to a CIA honey trap.
Howard Hughes was connected to it?
No. Well, Howard Hughes was connected to it, but in a kind of a different way. Mm-hmm. But the Democratic National Committee was, if you were a Democratic big shot, you would go to Maxie Wells. She was the secretary at the Democratic National Committee, and she had like a folder of pictures of prostitutes. And if you would choose a prostitute, and they would be at the Columbia Plaza Apartments, which is about a block away, these upscale apartments. And that's where the CIA had their hidden cameras. So when the burglars broke in, the one conspiracy was to get dirt on the Democrats. And Eugenia Martinez, one of the burglars, had the key to Maxie Wells's desk where she kept the pictures. And when they were busted, their photographic equipment was set up on her desk. So that was the one conspiracy. And that was ordered by John Dean and Jeb Magruder. John Dean was a counselor to the president and supposedly a hero. But if you read my book, you'll see that he's a pathological liar. And Jeb Magruder, who was the acting chairman of the committee to reelect the president. 1 second here. My mouth will start frying. Yeah. So John Dean's wife, the honey trap brothel was run by Heidi Bryant. And she was a good friend of Marine Dean. And a lot of people have thought that Marine Dean, John Dean's wife, was one of the proms in this brothel. So, and John Dean was the guy that came across as, I'm going to out the administration. I'm going to come clean. But I show that, he tells a lot of lies. And actually, what happened is, so you've got some of the burglars going for the dirt with the brothel. And then you've got James McCord and Howard Hunt, who are, G. Gordon Liddy's supposed to be the head of the plumbers, but you've got Howard Hunt and Gordon and James McCord. Their goal is to get busted. They want to hurt the Nixon administration as much as they possibly can. So there were two break-ins. People just think there were one. There was two break-ins. The first break-in, James McCord and the Cubans, all CIA assets. Well, actually, James McCord was ostensibly retired from the CIA, but I don't believe that he was. Mm-hmm. They signed in to the Federal Reserve, which had been burgled the previous month at like 11 o'clock at night. And the Federal Reserve, because it had been burgled, had added enhanced security. So he was trying to get busted that night, but the security guard couldn't put two and two together. So the next time they went in, one of his Confederates called the DC police and told them that people were breaking into the Watergate. And 2 blocks away, a guy, his name was Carl Schaffler. He was a DC cop, but he was also a CIA guy too. And he was like parked and he was improbably parked 2 blocks away from the Watergate. So when the call came in, he just buzzed over to the Watergate and arrested the burglars. And what's really fascinating about Watergate, so it's a conspiracy within a conspiracy.
Right.
There was one part of the conspiracy was to get dirt on the Democrats, and that was basically from G. Gordon Liddy that was emanated from John Dean and G. Gordon Liddy to some of the Cubans. But then the CIA guys, Howard Hunt and James McCord, their goal was to damage the Nixon administration. And that's what they were able to do during that Watergate break-in, is get caught and start damaging the Nixon administration.
So the way Danny Sheehan explained this to me, well, I guess he explained the prelude to this. And the way he explained it to me was that when Nixon was campaigning and he realized that he thought he was going to win after Rockefeller dropped out, he thought that, like, this is going to win. There's no chance this Kennedy guy is going to beat me. I guess this was before Kennedy was elected president. And right before he was elected president, he was contacted by, Nixon was the head of, like, the 5412 committee, the National Security Committee. It was in charge of, like, covert ops and stuff like that. And Howard Hughes, Nixon wanted Castro to be assassinated, and Nixon went to Howard Hughes, who was tied into intelligence and planning covert ops and stuff like that. He told Howard Hughes, I want you to get rid of Castro. So Howard Hughes went to one of the mafia guys in Vegas, who went to another mafia guy in, like, Chicago, and they were trying to figure out how to put together a team to kill Castro. And they said, oh, well, that's Traficante's territory. And Traficante was based in Florida at the time. I think he was in Tampa. And then they met with Santos Traficante and the Fountain Blue. And Traficante was like, okay, if you guys want, if this is really coming from the next president, Nixon, I need to have some sort of confirmation before we do this or whatever. So Nixon sent one of his guys, who was like a CIA staffer or somebody at the CIA, to go give the green light to Traficante to take out Castro and Che and Raul. And eventually he did it, and they recruited some guys from Operation 40, who were some anti-Castro Cuban exiles who were conducting sabotage in Cuba. and one of those guys happened to be Felix Rodriguez. And eventually after that, they got, I guess, four of those same guys that were originally hired to take out Castro
ended up as the
Watergate burglars. So when they caught those Watergate burglars, one of them, I think his name was Baker.
Yeah.
What was his name? It was
Barker.
Bernard Barker. Bernard Barker had cash in his pocket, and they were looking at those notes. And what was happening was the way they were paying these Operation 40 guys that were they were put in these triangular fire squads, these triangular assassination fire squads, where they would set up in the formation of a triangle to take out a moving target. They were funding those guys by skimming money off of one of these mob hotels in Vegas, taking it to Meyer Lansky's bank in Miami, and then wiring it from Meyer Lansky's bank in Miami to the Banco Internacional in Mexico City. And that's how they were paying these guys. So one of those, Bernard Barker, who was caught in Watergate, one of the burglars, he had a note in his pocket that was traced back to that bank. So one of the guys, I forget who it was, there was a CIA guy or an FBI guy who was investigating this. And he was about to go down to that bank in Mexico City to figure out what was going on with that bank account. They got wind of it, and they let Nixon's chief of staff know about it. Now, Nixon's chief of staff told this to Nixon, and he's like, you got to get Richard Helms and the head of the FBI in a room together and tell them to nix this whole investigation, because if they figure out what was really going on in that bank and how they were paying why we were paying those guys in Operation 40 to set up those triangular hit teams, it's going to pull off a scab that's going to be a genie we can't put back in the bottle. So we have to stop that investigation. And
I agree with a lot of it, and I disagree with a lot of it.
And he said that those same Cubans that were set up to take out Castro and were also used in the Watergate burglary, those were the same guys that were used to kill the president in '63.
Now that I can't really talk about, but it was Robert Mayhew was working for Howard Hughes. He was Howard Hughes's financial point man. And it's a very strange relationship because they never met face to face. I guess Howard had long hair and was shooting Valium and codeine. So he was having his difficulties, but they would talk. But Mayhew was hooked up with the FBI and the CIA. And there's a book that just came out about this called Mafia Spies by Thomas Mayer. And it was the CIA went to Mayhew and said, can you reach out to some mafiosi? We want to hit Castro. So Mayhew put these CIA guys in touch with Johnny Roselli, who was part of the Chicago outfit, but he was in L.A. He was shaking down like unions that had to do with anything that had to do with showbiz. He was involved in, and then he went to Sam Giancana, who was the head of the outfit at that point, the capo of the outfit. And those two got together and we're talking. And then eventually Mayhew kind of receded to a certain degree. So it was the CIA guys that were working with both Roselli and also Giancana.
Right. And then those are the guys who said, this is not our territory. This has to go to Trafficante.
Well, and then they brought in, now Trafficante was... And this is what I thought earlier in this book that I'm talking about, Mafia Spies. Trafficante was very cynical about it. And he really wanted nothing to do with the FBI or the CIA. And he had lost a lot of money because of Castro. But I think that he was, I mean...
right. All these guys were losing money.
Because...
The
Castro took over their casinos.
Yeah.
But anyway, what happened was first Sam Giancana got shot in the back of the head. Sam Giancana was told to get out of the country for a number of years, and he was centered in Mexico, and he was opening up various casinos in different countries. And then he came back, and he'd put so much heat on himself. He was going out with one of the McGuire sisters, who they were very popular at that point. And also, and this is kind of a crazy story, but Dorothy McGuire was going out with Dan Rowan, who was a comedian. Rowan and Martin's Laughing, probably a little bit before your time. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it was a very popular show in the 60s. So Giancana was very, very jealous that Dan Rowan was hitting on his girlfriend. I think her last name was McGuire. I think it was Dorothy. But anyway, so Giancana had the CIA bug Dan Rowan's room.
Oh, wow.
But the hierarchy of the Chicago mob was very disappointed with Giancana because he was going out with these, and he was hanging out with Frank Sinatra a lot, and he was going out with these starlets, and he was just attracting too much attention to himself. So they ultimately decided he had to go, and I think him dealing with the CIA was probably a critical mass too, that he just had to go. So he had gotten back from Mexico, and he was cooking sausages in his basement, and someone shot him in the back of the head with a .22, which is the ideal way to kill someone, because if you got a .22, the bullet just goes around and around and tears up the brain. It's it's a favored. And then Johnny Roselli was found in a drum with it cut in half, and I had always thought that it was the CIA or the Chicago mob that probably hit Giancana. This guy makes an argument that it was Trafficante. I don't know. I really don't know who hit Giancana. It was probably the Chicago mob, but it could have been the CIA. But the person knew him, so it was probably the Chicago mob. But with Roselli had made Trafficante was one of these old-time mafia dudes that really liked being anonymous. And Roselli had brought him into the press. And I believe that that's who killed Roselli. I don't think it was the CIA, but I think it was probably Trafficante. Now, when you're getting to that money, there was money in that Mexico account, and the FBI was investigating it. But my sources tell me that money had come from Committee to Re-elect the President. And it was given by a bunch of big donors, and it was being laundered through that Mexico bank. And those Watergate burglars did, in fact, end up with a bunch of that money. They were all sequential $100 bills. But according to my sources, that's where that money came from. It didn't come from like some kind of slush from the CIA. It came from a slush fund from Nixon's Committee to Re-elect the President.
So he was saying the money came from, it was skimmed off the casinos, sent to Meyer Lansky's bank and wired to that bank, and it was used to pay those Cubans to operate those hit teams that were used to kill Castro, and that were eventually used to kill the president. And when Danny Sheehan interviewed Santos Trafficante,
he interviewed Trafficante?
He interviewed Trafficante, yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
He said Trafficante told him the reason he sent those guys into Watergate was because the head of the DNC and Howard Hughes, there was something in there that was going to link Nixon to Howard Hughes, because Howard Hughes was like the biggest lobbyist for Nixon. And they were afraid it was going to come out that Nixon was behind that Cuban hit team. And if we found out that Nixon was behind the Cuban hit team, people would somehow connect the dots between Nixon and the Kennedy's death, which was false, but it would be people would think that, right? People would think that Nixon was behind that. He didn't want people to think that, and it wasn't true. So anyways, that's what Traficante told Danny Sheehan when he interviewed him. And that was what he took away for the motive of the burglary of Watergate.
Because Nixon didn't even know about the burglary. That's where that theory runs into a trouble. Nixon recorded everything. And Nixon didn't know. No one in the Nixon administration, the hierarchy at Nixon administration, knew who sent those guys in to break into the Watergate. They didn't even know. And Nixon, where there is some truth there, though, is Nixon was aware that the CIA had killed Kennedy. And actually, there's tapes where Dick Helms is being grilled by Nixon. Who shot John? Who shot John? Where Nixon's really trying to put heat on Helms to make him cough up that the CIA, because Nixon knew it, but Helms wasn't willing to cough it up. Now, what happened after Watergate is you had H.R. Haldeman, who was the chief of staff, and you had John Ehrlichman, who was, as far as just the number 3 guy. Mm-hmm. And they had a meeting with Dick Helms, who was the head of the CIA, and Vern Walters, who was the associate head of the CIA. Mm-hmm. And Nixon told Haldeman, just say the Bay of Pigs thing. So that was like the secret nomenclature for the Kennedy hit. So Haldeman and Ehrlichman are there, and Helms and Walters are there. And Haldeman asks the CIA to play its national security trump card, because that can call off the FBI. If the CIA plays like its national security trump card, the FBI will back away, which is how the CIA has got away with so much illegalities over the years. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so Haldeman says to Helms, I want you to call off the FBI.
Right.
Because the FBI was looking into that money.
And Helms was like, what am I going to say?
No. Helms said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then Haldeman said, this might open the Bay of Pigs thing.
Right. And the connection to Mexico.
Well, no, he was referring to the Kennedy hit.
Right. But the Bay of Pigs guys were the guys that they used for the Kennedy hit.
Yeah. I mean, the Bay of Pigs ultimately went against Kennedy.
Yeah.
So, and then Helms just exploded. I mean, just exploded. And then he said, okay, we'll do it. We'll call off the FBI. Mm-hmm. But he double-crossed Nixon because he didn't call off the FBI. And he said he was going to, but he didn't. So, and Helms and Nixon hated each other. I mean, Nixon was doing all his major geopolitical moves for the National Security Council with Henry Kissinger. And Helms was allowed to brief the National Security Council, but then he had to leave. He was persona non grata. So Nixon and Helms really hated each other. There's a book, which I think is a little light, called Scorpion's Dance, about the relationship between Helms and Nixon. And I believe it's kind of weird. The guy that wrote it talks about their antipathy, and then he talks about they liked each other. I don't think that that's the case at all. I think Helms and Nixon just really hated each other. When Helms would come in and talk about, would come in and brief the National Security Council, Nixon would just rip into the CIA. Nixon did not like the CIA. And that's why it was those CIA guys that started infiltrating the Nixon administration. And that's how they were going to get rid of him. They didn't know exactly how they were going to get rid of him, but they just wanted to incriminate the Nixon administration any possible way. And Bob Woodward is definitely an intelligence asset. And I show in my book that, okay, it came out that the associate director of the FBI, Mark Felt, was Deep Throat.
Mark Felt, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so
Mark Felt was the guy who originally was going to go investigate that money that was in that bank in Mexico.
Mark Felt was ultimately fired from the FBI. And, okay, so according to Woodward, now this is Bob Woodward, and actually Ben Bradley was had connections to the CIA too. He was he was the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post. So according to Bob Woodward, he had this communication set up with Deep Throat, who was ostensibly Mark Felt. And he would move the flower pot on his balcony if he wanted to talk to Felt. And then he would go through all these machinations of cabs, and then they ultimately meet in this underground parking lot in Virginia. And then if Felt wanted to talk to Woodward, they had a certain page of the New York Times where Felt would put a clock at what time he wanted to meet. Now, that is all bullshit because Mark Felt was fired. Okay, the most damning information from Deep Throat came in November of 1973. And Mark Felt had been fired 5 months earlier in May. So basically, Bob Woodward is trying to make us believe that Mark Felt was driving into Washington, D.C. every day from Virginia because he lived in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And then he was going by Woodward's balcony. But Woodward's balcony faced a courtyard. So if you wanted to see Woodward's balcony, you had to go down an alley and then you'd have to walk 50 feet and look straight up. That's the only way that you could see Woodward's balcony. So they want us to believe that Mark Felt was driving in every day from Virginia and stopping his car, going down the alley, stopping his car, and then looking at Woodward's balcony. And then the thing about him leaving the newspaper, okay, so all the newspapers where Woodward was living were put in a pile. They weren't delivered to the door. They were put in a pile. So anybody could have gotten the newspaper that was ostensibly earmarked for Woodward. Where Woodward was getting his information, his most devastating information, was Alexander Haig. And Woodward said that he didn't meet Haig until 1973. But Haig was actually, when he was a naval intelligence officer, he was interviewing Haig or briefing Haig in 1969 and 1970. And Haig had become, because of Watergate, Haldeman and Ehrlichman split, and Haig became Nixon's chief of staff, and Haig secretly hated Nixon and wanted to get rid of him. And in my book, I really do show how Haig and Woodward colluded to get rid of Nixon. It was, but Haig, you get the guy who said that there were the tapes that really tarnished Nixon. He was a CIA guy. Leon Jaworski, the special prosecutor of the Watergate that ultimately got Nixon, forced Nixon out of office, he was also had CIA connections. So you've got all these guys with CIA connections kind of coming together to get Nixon out of office. It's quite an orchestration.
Yeah, Dick Helms was one of the most sinister people to ever be a part of run the CIA. I mean, the stuff that he was involved with was astonishing and despicable, like MK Ultra and all the mind control stuff.
And then he destroyed all the documents.
Yeah.
So we'll never really know. I mean, we've gotten to know how like with the
and Epstein was obsessed with that stuff too.
With the Ewan Cameron stuff, Ewan Cameron was a Canadian psychiatrist in Montreal that was erasing people's hard drives. I mean, people would like. He dealt with postpartum women that were having depression. Yeah. And guys would bring their wives to Ewan Cameron, and then he would give them mega doses of electroshock and Thorazine and all kinds of stuff. And they didn't even know who they were by the time they left. And who knows what kind of diabolical stuff Helms covered up, because he ordered all those documents destroyed. And he also ordered all the Watergate documents destroyed, too.
Oh, did he?
So my take on that is, yes, there was money in Mexico, and that these burglars were getting money from, but it was coming through, actually, it was going to Gordon Liddy first, and then he was disseminating it to the burglars, the sequential $100 bills. That's and that money was originally being laundered from the committee to reelect the president. I do not believe, because of my research. You can read my book, and then you can read Sheehan's book, and you can decide. But I don't think
Sheehan wrote a book on it. He was just telling because he was part of the investigation.
Because when you write a book on something, you really have to understand it. And like I said, the book has 2,238 citations. So I believe what I'm saying about where the money started. I'm definitely saying it was being laundered in Mexico, but I'm just saying it wasn't CIA money. It was committee to reelect the president money. And those guys were definitely CIA assets. Everybody, all those burglars were CIA assets except for G. Gordon Liddy. And G. Gordon Liddy, Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy, or Hunt and McCord were just spinning circles around G. Gordon Liddy. Hunt and McCord were super spooks. And
right. Yeah, Sheehan met with McCord and Hunt many times.
And I do believe that Hunt was part of the Kennedy assassination, definitely. I mean, he even admitted to it to a certain degree. His kid, St. John Hunt, had a tape of him saying that he was a bench warmer, quote unquote bench warmer on the Kennedy hit. Whatever bench warmer is.
Right.
But he did confess to his kid. And St. John has had his problems with substances, but I know him a little bit. I tend to believe him.
Well, I mean, it does make sense, right, that those Cubans, they hated Kennedy, right? Those Cubans,
yes.
They hated Kennedy specifically because he was calling off all of those hit teams. There was a bunch of areas.
Well, there was the storming of the Bay of Pigs,
right.
And they wanted Kennedy to call in the Air Force,
yes,
and bomb, and he wouldn't do it. And
yeah, there was Northwoods where they wanted to fly in that plane that was unmanned and shoot it down.
Yeah, that was Northwoods, but that was after the Bay of Pigs, I believe. Northwoods, for sure.
Right. What is this, Steve? Oh, this is what he's talking about, benchwarmer.
Yeah. So the article says...
Is this
Jesus,
Nick's article?
Long. No, this is...
Oh, the Salon.
Inside the plot.
Inside the plot to kill JFK, the secret history of the CIA and what really happened in Dallas. Right. Yeah. And then Kennedy started, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy started talking directly with Khrushchev. And there was a bunch of, they were communicating directly, and they were both trying to come up with an agreement, negotiated or handled. The middleman was like the Pope, right? And the Pope was basically handling the negotiation between Kennedy and Khrushchev to basically get rid of their nuclear arsenal. And the Joint Chiefs wanted nothing to do with that. And Kennedy at the same time was calling off these Cubans, these Operation 40 guys, and the guys that were all involved with the Bay of Pigs, these hit squads and these covert assassins, and calling them down. And then one of the guys, I forget his name, who was running one of those ranches where they were training the Cubans, they went against Kennedy's orders and they went and attacked a destroyer. I think it was right off Cuba, against Kennedy's wishes. Like, he told them not to do anything more, and they did that anyways. And then that's basically, that's the motive where they assume that, like, okay, it was the same hit squads because they hated Kennedy. They already trained him to kill Castro, so we can, put them in Dallas, and the rest is history.
I think that there definitely was CIA involvement in the Kennedy hit, but why would those guys want to take down Nixon? I mean, that's the thing. And the reason why they wanted to take down Nixon is because Nixon was, like I said, the Army had started an espionage ring against Nixon. Mm-hmm. And Nixon had told the Russians that he was willing to get out of Vietnam if they would perpetuate the strategic arm limitation talks. And he wanted to open up China. And the Hawks were adamantly against. They didn't trust the communists at all. They were adamantly against what Nixon was doing and losing. Basically, they thought he was losing Vietnam. So I believe that it was definitely, well, first of all, it was the Army Hawks, and then it was the CIA Hawks that ultimately took down Nixon.
Right.
that fomented Watergate.
It's a big convoluted story. I mean, you're not kidding when you say it's a conspiracy inside of a conspiracy. It's a lot to follow.
The thing about Watergate is the first conspiracy is some of the burglars were looking for blackmail material from that brothel that was hooked up to the CIA.
Yeah.
But then McCord and Hunt, they were trying to get busted to hurt the Nixon administration. So, and what's kind of amazing about that is you've got these two conspiracies going on simultaneously, and both of them no one really knows about. I mean, some really good books have been written about it, like Jim Hogan's Secret Agenda and Len Kolodny's Silent Coup. I mean, these are really good books, but these are thick, big books. I mean, you don't pick up a book like that and read it. You've got to study those books. And I tried to make Watergate very, very simple. I mean, I tried to make Watergate as simple as I possibly could, and it's still a complex book.
Right. It's just like, why did Trafficante say that though?
You know, I'm amazed that Trafficante would say anything. I mean, that goes against everything that I know about Trafficante. That he would say that, because he was one of those godfathers that was completely anonymous. And I mean, he dressed there was nothing pretentious about Sandro Trafficante that screamed, "I am a mob boss." I mean, he was kind of like Carl Gambino. He looked like a kindly old guy. So I'm kind of stunned that Sandro Trafficante would say that to someone.
Can you look up, or is there documentation of Sheehan's interview with Trafficante? I wonder if that's documented anywhere, or if it's ever been written about or anything like that.
Because that would be new to me, man.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that, but it just goes against everything that I know about Trafficante, that he would give an interview like that.
Over the ensuing years, political buff Trafficante became a big Nixon fan, according to the Godfather's lawyer, Frank Regano. Santos viewed Nixon as a realistic conservative politician who was not a zealot and who would not be hard on him as mob friends. Keep going down.
Yeah, is there a keyword you're looking for?
Yeah, do a search for what was the burglar's name?
Barker. Bernard Barker.
Type in Bernard Barker.
There we go.
There you go. Okay, so why did Trafficante have so much intel on Richard Nixon's secret world? Sheehan, look, they're citing Sheehan. Sheehan says the Godfather got most of his inside information from two of his former lieutenants, Nixon's Watergate burglars, Frank Sturgis and Bernard Barker, the lawyers at the Trafficante-friendly D.C. law firm who conducted the Watergate-era interview with the mafia don, kept his disclosures to themselves for decades, and Nixon's vice presidential sponsorship of the plots against Castro's life was not confirmed until well after Nixon's death in 1984. Nixon's role.
94.
We'll go. What's the okay? The Godfather's Nixon Watergate scandal. Either efforts to kill Castro were not made public until recently. One of Bailey's investigators, Danny Sheehan, revealed them in his memoirs and the college lecture halls where he taught as a professor. Sheehan says Trafficante reported that Nixon used a
There's Robert Mayhew, the guy who I was talking about.
Right. A secure scrambler phone to get Howard Hughes on board in the Castro murder scheme, adding that Hughes then chose his own right-hand man, Robert Mayhew, to help conduct the effort. Yeah.
My understanding of it is very different.
Yeah.
Howard Hughes was kind of out to lunch at that point, and the CIA approached Mayhew.
Right.
Not Hughes.
So, yeah, he's saying that Hughes got Mayhew, that Hughes went to Mayhew.
Yeah, it was, from my understanding. And actually, there was a really good book written about it recently called Mafia Spies, where it talks about the CIA going to Mayhew.
And is it true that Hughes was a big contributor to Nixon?
Yeah. Hughes was a big contributor to everybody.
Okay.
So he would give money to Democrats and Republicans.
He is an interesting figure. There's a lot of weird shit with Howard Hughes in his history. I mean, he was responsible for like the Glomar Explorer, the ship that pulled up that nuclear Russian submarine, and a whole bunch of other crazy shit.
I mean, Howard Hughes is one of those people in history that's kind of an enigma.
Yeah.
And we don't really know. I mean, this is my firm belief. We don't really know where Howard Hughes stopped and Mayhew began. Because I think that Mayhew ended up calling a lot of shots behind Howard Hughes' back. I mean, Mayhew worked for Hughes for years and never met him.
Really?
Yeah, which is really interesting. Never met him.
Yeah.
So, and Mayhew was definitely a CIA guy. And I believe, I mean, this is just my take on it, that he was doing all kinds of stuff behind Howard Hughes' back. So when Howard Hughes started buying up the casinos, with Mayhew was kind of the point man of buying all those casinos in Vegas, the scam was still intact. It's estimated that the mob managed to siphon about $30 million from Howard Hughes. Now, if Mayhew had really been overseeing those casinos that Hughes was buying, I don't think that the gangsters would have been able to skim $30 million from it. So there's some kind of weird nexus between Mayhew and the CIA and also organized crime. And we're learning more about it, but I don't think it's been fully elucidated yet.
What do you think? It's credible that Nixon was the one who wanted Castro assassinated and set that whole thing in motion?
Okay, so my understanding is that the CIA went to Mayhew. And now Nixon was out of power at this point.
I thought he was the head of the 5412 committee.
We're talking when this plot is being hatched, it's like 1962,
It's when he's running for president, right?
No, he ran for president in 1960.
Okay.
So the CIA met with Mayhew and then Roselli and Giancana when Nixon was kind of in the wilderness. He was those 6 years. In 1962, he ran for governor of California, and then he got beat by Pat Brown, Jerry Brown's dad, and then he moved to New York City and became a big shot lawyer. So from 1960 to 1968, Nixon was pretty much out of politics. And that's when that plot to kill Castro was cooked up.
Right.
So I don't think that he could have been the prime mover of it.
Okay, so yeah, my understanding, I guess the timing is a little bit off here, because my understanding was that he did this, and one of the reasons that he was able to pull this off was because he thought he was going to win the presidential election against Kennedy.
Well,
he didn't expect Kennedy to beat him, and the reason that he was able to pull all these strings with the mafia is because everyone thought he was going to win, and they're like, look, the next president, Nixon, wants this to be done. That was my understanding of it.
Okay, so Bobby Kennedy finds out because Bobby Kennedy's going after the mob very hard.
Right.
And then he finds out that the CIA has conscripted gangsters to kill Castro. Mm-hmm. And I've read two different accounts of this. In the book that I just read, Mafia Spies, he's kind of cool with it. Mm-hmm. And other accounts that I've read, he just loses it. And he's really upset because he's going after the mob so hard, and then the CIA is making these side deals with the mob. And that really, he just kind of fulminates. So I don't know which account is true, but I don't believe, I mean, from everything that I've read, Nixon was not the prime mover of the CIA conscripting the mafia to hit Castro.
Okay. It's definitely an interesting history.
It's when you start digging into
I gotta
history.
put you and Sheehan in touch.
But with my Watergate book, I mean, if you look at the bibliography, I mean, it's pretty exhaustive. I read a lot of books to write that book, and I read a lot of government documentation to write that book, and a lot of articles. So of course, I wrote it, so I'm going to think that.
Right.
But I can make an argument that I am right.
Okay. So going back to current day, do you think there's going to be any sort of October surprise regarding Epstein with this upcoming election?
My thoughts on that are both the Republicans and Democrats are corrupted that way.
Okay.
I do not see an October surprise because the thing that Americans are really polarized right now.
Yes.
The right thinks the left is crazy. The left thinks the right is crazy. There's a small percentage of the left that's woke, and the right thinks that
That's all the left.
It's all the left,
Right.
and they're crazy. And then there's the right has QAnon, which is pretty crazy, and the left thinks that they're crazy. So
Right. That's just the very far spectrum of
So-
each side.
so-
QAnon and the woke are almost the same thing.
Yeah. So you've got this
It's the horseshoe theory.
you've got this balkanization between the right and left. The only thing that I believe that can bring people together at this point, Americans together of right and left, is Epstein. If Americans truly understand that the government has let child all these kids with impunity, I think that could bring the right and left together. I think that's the only issue, that children shouldn't be with impunity, which we've seen with Epstein. I think that is the only thing that the right and left can agree on wholeheartedly at this point.
Couldn't somebody get a hold of some sort of shit with Trump and Epstein and try to release that right before the election, try to throw a wrench in Trump's presidency?
I don't know. I mean, according to
or do you think it's just as damning on the other side? It's going to go both ways.
Yeah, I believe that politicians, both the Republicans and Democrats, I mean, the reason why we haven't gone after the Republicans haven't gone after Epstein when it's mostly Democrats, because the Republicans are compromised that way. The Franklin scandal, as I said earlier, the Franklin scandal was about Republicans and little boys, and Epstein is primarily about Democrats and little girls. So both parties are equally incriminated in that type of behavior.
Right, but who holds on to that information? That's the question.
Well, I believe that there's some malignant corner of intelligence that's
right.
That's doing all this.
It's gotta be, right?
And what we know about, according to the thing about Alexander Acosta is he's never denied that. Even when he was giving his press conference, when he was getting booted out of the Trump cabinet, labor secretary, he's never denied that he was told that,
right,
that Epstein was intelligence. He's never denied it. So, and as I said earlier, there's two people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the president, one is the attorney general. It can be delivered, that message can be delivered, but think of the kind of power that's required. You've got to have it either coming from the president, and think about this too. It went on under Bush, it went under Obama, it went under went under Trump, and now it's Biden. So 4 presidential administrations have covered up Epstein. 2 Republican, 2 Democrat.
Right.
And that kind of shows you how lethal that issue is. That 4 presidential administrations, 2 Republican, 2 Democrat, have had to cover it up.
Right. It just, the people that are behind it that are really running things are the ones that are, I think, compromised the most. Not just the presidents themselves, right? Because, I mean, if you think about just presidents, right, who's had the worst sort of public view or public association with Epstein, and that's definitely Trump. I mean, right? He's the one that has the video footage of him like dancing and partying with him in Mar-a-Lago with all those girls. No, there's no other footage of any other presidents with him like they're like that, right? But the establishment who is behind these presidents, like right now, it's obviously like Joe Biden's not really doing anything. There's people that are pulling the strings behind him that are making things happen. And I think if you just follow the money, it will tell you everything you want to know.
At this point, Epstein has almost become a non-issue, unfortunately. I mean, that's why Epstein Justice is really trying to make this an issue, because the media, and this is amazing, there's been tons of ink spilt on Jeffrey Epstein. But I'm not aware of a major media that's come out and said, we need justice here. I was going to be on CNN. There was that Epstein document dump in January, and CNN called me and said, because you were released a black book, would you like to be on the show? And I said, sure. And I said, I'd also like to talk about Epstein justice, because there's a lot of kids that really need, we need justice for them. And then I got a text, we're going to go a different direction, Nick.
Why?
Because no one in the mainstream media has called for justice for Epstein's victims. No one. I mean, if you can show me somebody that has.
What is their problem with that, though?
Because it seems to be an issue that is untouchable. No one in the media is calling for justice for Jeffrey Epstein's victims. No one is saying that the government covered this up. No one is saying that there's all these perpetrators that need to be prosecuted. Nobody in the media is saying that. I mean, they're very good at digging up salacious dirt on various, like Gates and Leon Black and other people, but that's about where it stops, is salacious dirt. None of those articles get into justice. They're just about salacious dirt.
Yeah, I still just don't understand why they would be against talking about the compensation and providing justice to the girls that were abused. Like, what? I don't see the red flag there.
I mean, if you can show me an example of some media saying,
right,
hey,
no, I can't, but I'm wondering why they're choosing not to cover that, or why to ignore that.
I would say that someone or some people very on high are pulling the strings. Because
do you think it has something to do with that fund run by that lawyer?
I don't know. I mean, one of the problems is 90% of the media that's imbibed by Americans is owned by 6 corporations.
Yes.
So you've got these titanic corporations that can be broken up with Sherman antitrust laws, but the government isn't trying to break them up. They're just letting them exist. It just seems to me that there would be a détente between these titanic corporations and the government, where the government isn't breaking them up, and the titanic corporations are being said, we don't really want you covering this.
Okay.
Stay away from this. I mean, that's what makes sense to me. I could be wrong.
Where does Rupert Murdoch fit into all this? Does he have any ties to any of this stuff? Is he ever, or him or any of his kids, do they have any connections to any of this stuff personally?
There isn't any Murdochs in Epstein's Black Book.
No. Interesting.
So I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. But just because someone is in Epstein's Black Book, it doesn't mean that they're not compromised.
Sure. And you were saying earlier something about there's something significant about somebody being in the Black Book and being circled versus just being in the Black Book.
Yes. The people that are circled, okay, how the Black Book came to exist was Alfredo Rodriguez stole all of Epstein's numbers, and which is the Black Book.
Who was Alfredo Rodriguez?
He was Epstein's house manager.
Okay.
And he was asked by attorneys that were deposing him if he had any extra information. He was saying no. His plan was to sell the Black Book. So he got in touch with one of the attorneys that was representing some of Epstein's victims in civil suits and said, "I've got the Holy Grail, and I'll sell it to you for, I think, like $50,000. And the attorney went to the FBI, and then the FBI did a sting where they set Rodriguez up, and he sold the book to a female FBI agent.
No.
Yeah. So that's how and then I got the Black Book from some people who got it from the FBI.
Holy shit.
But Rodriguez said that the people that were circled were in cahoots with Epstein on the as far as the child abuse.
So the FBI are the ones that did the circles?
No.
Epstein was.
Rodriguez.
Oh, Rodriguez.
Rodriguez did the
okay.
circles, yeah. And Trump's name is circled. Now, Clinton's name is not circled, but Epstein's got 25 contact numbers for him.
Wild, man. What else are you working on? What's in the near future for you? Do you have any big projects in the works? Or any big stories you're working on?
No, I'm trying to sell Watergate books, and I'm really trying to get Epstein justice some momentum.
Okay.
We have to. I think we're at the point where we cannot let our government allow children to be with impunity. Mm-hmm. And I also think that our government is heavily tainted by blackmail. So we want, with Epstein justice, it's very simple what we want. We want a commission that's going to tell us why the government covered up child molestation, and we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. It's very simple what we want. But I think if you bore down, if we have a commission and we actually bore down on Epstein, we will come across the cesspool that translates into a congressional approval rating of 13%.
Well, thank you again for coming on and telling this stuff, telling the story, explaining the shit to me. I appreciate it. Yeah, my pleasure. Where can people find your books? Where can they find your website? And I don't know if you have social media.
I do. Nick Bryant NYC is my website. Epstein Justice.
Oh, look at that. There we go.
.com is my the name of the organization that I started, the 501c3.
Beautiful.
And thank you for having me down in Florida. I mean, it's a little brisk and cold down here, but but I've been able to handle it.
Yeah, not as hot as New York, but we're trying.
Yeah, hey.
Thanks again, man. I'll link all your stuff below.
Okay.
Thank you for listening and watching. Good night.